Hello, hello. Just going to see if this works. Let's see here. Do let me know in the chat if you guys can see me and if you can hear me. Let's see here, just getting set up. Just testing here. Hello, everyone. Can you all hear me okay? See me okay? Everything looks good. I saw someone, right, working. Lovely. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining me on my live stream here. This is the first time I'm doing a live stream on this channel, so I'm still figuring out the kinks of all the tech. I can see that the screen's a little darker than I'd like it to be, but these are unfortunately all the lights I currently own. But yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for joining me on this very, very exciting Danish election night. Thank you to anyone who might have watched the collab I did with EU Made Simple just before coming on here. We had a great chat, especially about the exit polls that came out, which was really, really interesting. I think the results for this election are going to make this a massive drama that will end up following for the next couple of weeks. But yeah, so if you guys have any questions or comments, anything you'd like to say, let me know in the chat. I can see there, I think that's what you'd call a super chat. I'm not used to those. But thank you so much, and thank you to everyone who is watching. I'll be reading those comments as we go, and I'll be answering as many of the questions as I can. But yeah, this will just be a fairly chill live stream. We'll see as results roll in. There'll be periods that aren't super interesting. There might be periods that are super, super interesting. I will share my screen in a moment where I'll have the big news sites up, and I've currently got the TV playing over there as well, so I can follow what's going on there. So a lot going on, and this will be hopefully interesting and also hopefully pretty relaxed and chill. Lovely. Well, before and I promise I will get to some of those questions, especially that super chat, but first I'd just like to take you all through what's currently happened so far, the results that we do have. As of right now, we don't really have results. We've got a couple that have rolled in, but what we're really basing this on so far is exit polls. We've got two big exit polls, one from DR, Danish radio, which is our big public broadcaster. And then we've got another one from TV2, which is another one of our big public service stations. So both of those, and let me just share my screen here. There we go. Do let me know if this works for you guys and you can see what's going on there. Then I'll hop over here. So if we start with Danish radio, they've got this exit poll, which says 83 seats for what you'd call red bloc, 78 seats for blue bloc, and then 14 seats for the moderates right there in the middle. This will be fascinating in the long run, because this means that there is no majority in either of the blocks, and that Lars Løkke Rasmussen, who is the leader of the moderates, will have a lot of power. If we hop over to TV2, they've also got an exit poll. In their exit poll, it's slightly better for red bloc, with 86 seats, 75 for blue, and then still 14 for the moderates. That'll be the same thing. It will essentially be the moderates who get to dictate not all, but a lot of the coming government negotiations. We'll take all the parties sort of one by one, which and how they're all performing, about what the party leaders have done, how they've performed during this campaign, what the campaign has been about. There's a lot of ground to cover, but let me start by just having a quick look in the chat to see if there are any fun little questions. I'll start with the super chat from @Adnef 0388, ADNEF 0388, don't know how to pronounce that. Congrats on the election with high turnout. Yes, the turnout seems to be very, very good. Denmark normally does have high turnouts in the mid-80s, but it's, looking to be maybe even higher 80s. We still don't know the final number, but it does look very, very good. Also happy for a good result for the sister party to the party I represent in Norway, do you think the result could lead to discussion on 2% threshold? I, of course, don't know exactly what party it is you're referring to, but I reckon it'll probably either be the Green Left, or Socialistisk Folkeparti as it's known in Danish, who have had a very good result, or maybe it's Liberal Alliance, a sort of libertarian type party, or maybe it is the Danish People's Party, our sort of big national conservative party who's made a massive comeback. Do you think the result could lead to discussion on 2% threshold? I don't think so. I mean, there's always a lot of talk about the threshold, always a little before the campaign. Once the campaign starts, there's not really that much debate about whether it should be at 2%. I think people tend to be okay with it. I mean, it does look like we're going to have 12 parties elected to parliament, which is the most we've ever had in Denmark, I believe. So there will probably be some criticisms of the system, but let's see if most parties aren't generally okay with it. But who knows? Maybe because the Citizens Party, which is a bit of a... this isn't a critique of the party, but it is a troublesome party for the other parties in parliament. I think they're going to find it very hard to work with them. So maybe you could see some of the other parties looking at that and going, we really don't want parties like the Citizens Party, which is, it's national conservative, it's quite populist, and it has some people call it a borderline conspiratorial party. I don't necessarily think that's, I think that's very aggressive, but it does sometimes play into some of those tendencies. It's very critical of the World Economic Forum. It is quite critical of the then government's handling of the COVID epidemic, as well as the COVID vaccine. So maybe parties will look at the Citizens Party getting in and go, really wish that hadn't happened. Just want to check if you guys can see as I'm scrolling through here on the screen share. Might not be able to see that. Let me reload. Because it's not coming up on mine. We go remove this. Sorry, as I said, this is the first time I'm doing a live stream, so still figuring out the kinks of it. But let's see here. Boom, boom, boom. Here we go. So that's covering the whole screen. Let's minimize that a bit, and then we'll move me over here. Lovely. So yeah, as I said, this is the TV2 exit poll, and this is the DR exit poll. Lovely. Yeah, that all seems to be coming up quite well. Lovely. I'll have another quick look in the chat just to see if there's any exciting things going on there. Also, thanks for the great coverage this election cycle. You're very welcome. I'm happy that you guys enjoyed it. There's a lot of questions about potential governments. I'll get to that. Some questions about whether there will be a re-election, which I think is a very interesting question, and I'll also get to that. I'm just scrolling up someone saying I didn't show DR's election results, only TV2's. I think I fixed that problem now. Boom, 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 boom. Okay, cool. A lot of really interesting stuff here. Cool. Well, first of all, I'd just like to revisit the exit polls for a second because I think something happened. Okay. So DR has now released what is not called an exit poll, but what is called a prognostic. Based on the early results that have come in, and we're looking at already 27.5% of the votes have been counted, something massive has actually changed here. We're now seeing way more seats for Blue Bloc than before, and we're seeing substantially less seats for Red Bloc. We're still in the marginals, but this is the sort of thing that matters quite a bit We're also seeing some interesting stuff to happen down here. Venstre now being the biggest party. Before, in the exit poll, it was the second biggest party behind Liberal Alliance, which would be a massively bad result for them. We're seeing the Danish People's Party now the second largest in Blue Bloc. Oh, and now Venstre is bigger. My goodness, there's a lot of stuff happening there. So this is obviously quite crazy what's happening in this exit poll, especially considering how decent Danish exit polls normally are. I'm also just watching on the TV there, DR presenting this prognostic. So yeah, very, very exciting. But let's go back to some of the logistical questions, because this exit poll doesn't really change that much practically. So what we're seeing is essentially there's no majority in either of the blocks, which is going to make these government negotiations very challenging. We've got the moderates in the middle, essentially being the kingmakers. And before the election, there was quite a bit of chatter around this idea of if the polls turned out the way that they were expected to, or if the result turned out that the way that the polls expected it to, then there wouldn't be a government formation that would be feasible. That still kind of holds, I think, even with these changing prognostics. However, what that essentially means is that we would require at least one party to backtrack on something they've said. I've made the case both on this channel and at EU Made Simple that I think the likeliest thing to happen is that the moderates backtrack on something that they've said, that they wouldn't be a part of this left bloc majority plus the moderates, because they wouldn't want to be a part of a government that was based on mandates from this party. It's called Enhedslisten in Danish. It is called the Red Green Alliance in English. Now, they might, I think, backtrack on that if it's necessary to form a government. Something else we've seen, something that makes Blue Bloc quite challenging to work with, is the fact that the moderates' leader, Lars Løkke Rasmussen, has been out saying that he wouldn't form a government with the furthest right-wing seats. So that would imply the Danish People's Party, Dansk Folkeparti, and it would imply Borgernes Parti, the Citizens' Party. Alternatively, the Danish People's Party's leader, Morten Messerschmidt, has been out saying that he wouldn't support a government who has Lars Løkke Rasmussen, the leader of the moderates, as minister. So you can see how all of a sudden it's getting really, really complicated to form a government where you don't force someone to backtrack. Something else that could potentially happen is the idea of another grand coalition. The problem with that is that you would require the Social Democrats, and probably also Venstre, and maybe also the moderates, to work with a party like Socialistisk Folkeparti, or the Green Left. Venstre has been out saying they wouldn't work with the Green Left. The Green Left have been out saying they wouldn't work with Venstre. And it's not much better if you try to pull in the Conservatives, because the Green Left have also said they wouldn't work with the Conservatives. So again, it is looking like a couple of very confusing weeks. Now, I'm just taking in this new development in the Danish radio's prognostic, because this is quite big if the Blue Bloc is bigger than the Red Bloc. Whether this means that a type of Blue Bloc government becomes more likely, I don't think so, purely because of the fact that I think the tensions between the moderates and the Blue Bloc are stronger than the tensions between the moderates and the Red Bloc. As simple as that. Now let me have a look at some of the comments here. I'm just going to scroll up to where I think I stopped. I see Jack Mealy 4896 asking, will Løkke go more left or right? Kind of touching on that before. I think he's more likely to go left. I think he has more stuff in common with the left. I think he's uncomfortable with some of the rhetoric on immigration policy on the right, especially with the Danish People's Party. And I also think on environmental issues, he feels more at home with a party like the Social Liberals, Radikale Venstre, as it's called in Danish. I also think that he's also just going to find the cooperation on the left easier. Now, let's see. I'll read through some other comments. You can only see the map. And does the low reported percentage influence the DR results? Yes, it does. It very, very much does. That has a very big influence. Things can change quite a lot between now and the final result, as we just saw with this prognostic. Let me see. I'm just going to try something because I fear that the screen, my sharing screen, might be frozen again. I think it is. Let me try to take that down. Boom, 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 boom. Little bit of technical difficulty. We're going to get rid of this. Lovely, and then I will try to create a new screen sharing. I think if this Danish radio prognostic holds up, it is going to be a quite big change to the way that we think about this election, because so far throughout most of the campaign, the vibe has been that the left has been doing the best. But if it's true that Blue Bloc ends up being bigger than Red Bloc, I think this changes quite a lot. Now, here we go, and let's hop over on. There we go. Cool, and we are back with some screen sharing here. Lovely. Okay, I can see already now that Red Bloc is growing quite quickly in the prognostics, as I'm sure you guys can see as well. Now up to 81 seats, to the Blue Bloc's 81 seats. I think this makes a lot more sense in terms of what we had been expecting from the election. This looked like one where Red Bloc was just going to be better, do better than Blue Bloc. So this, I think, makes more sense from the vibe that I've been getting. And if we hop over to TV2, let's see if they've gotten anything new going here. They've still got Red Bloc with a pretty clear majority there. Interesting. All right. Let me have another look at some comments to see if people are saying anything. All right. Someone asking, why are TV2 and DR so different? The short answer is that TV2 are using this exit poll that they've got immediately after the polls closed, and which they've recorded by going out and speaking to people coming out of the election booth right after they voted, whereas DR are now incorporating the results that they're currently getting into the exit poll data that they have, and that leads to some quite interesting situations. And that data that they're using is based on what they expect to happen in certain parts of the country. Cool. According to exit polling, two Blue Blocs from the Greenland, that being the Democrats and Nalarak, I think it is fair to say that Nalarak is not really blue or red. This is a party in Greenland whose main issue is independence. I think they sort of place themselves somewhere in the middle, and I don't think that they'd work with any Danish government, and I don't think that they'd help to form any sort of coalition. Let's see here. All right, we're still at now 81, 13, 81. If this is the result, that would be quite interesting, because I think the narrative has been that, as I said, Red Bloc have massively outperformed Blue Bloc. This wouldn't be the case. And if we have a look at the parties, the current DR prognostic has the Social Democrats at 21.5% of the vote. This is still a pretty rubbish result for the party, and one of the worst ones in quite a while. It has the Green Left, as they're called in Socialistisk Folkeparti, at 10.7%. That's not as good as I think that they were hoping for. I think they were hoping for 13-14%, this being a pretty big decrease to expectations. It's still better than they did at the last election, but it's nowhere as good as what they were hoping for. And then here we've got, I think, one of the interesting stories of the night, which is which party in Blue Bloc is going to be the biggest. Right now, Venstre is leading at 10.5% of the vote. Danish People's Party in second, 9.5%, and then Liberal Alliance at 9.2%. I think if this holds, Liberal Alliance will be a bit disappointed. Throughout most of this campaign, they've been polling in third place as the then biggest party in Blue Bloc, behind Socialistisk Folkeparti, or the Green Left, and then the Social Democrats. So this is a bit of a, I wouldn't say poor result, because it's obviously better than the last time around, but I think they were expecting more. The moderates at 7.7%, I think they're going to be very, very happy with that. Just at the end of last year, they were looking quite close to the 2% threshold, which, of course, would potentially spell the party being eliminated from parliament. They're now clearly very, very far away from that one. And I think a big reason to that is the popularity of their leader, Lars Løkke Rasmussen, after the Greenland crisis, where he serves as foreign minister and where he was both very present in Danish media, but also very, very prominent in international media. And I think a lot of Danes felt quite comfortable with him at the helm. I'm seeing some people, the last comment saying, these results are absolutely bonkers. Interesting to see how things are right now. I agree. I am very surprised at this prognostic, but I think it looks like it's clearing up a bit. I think the prognostic seems to have been very, very off. And I think it turns out that the exit polls were maybe more accurate than the prognostics would suggest. Then we've got also on this list, the next one, Denmark Democrats, 7.3%. I think they're going to be fairly decently okay with that. That's very close to how they did last time. We've got the Conservatives at 7.3%. That's quite positive for them. I think they'll be happy. They had a very, very unfortunate election last time around with their now deceased leader coming into the election feeling like a potential prime ministerial candidate, only for a bunch of scandals around his then husband to hit the tabloids and for him to be effectively ruled as, you know, an impossibility when it came to government negotiations, also because the party got, 5-point-something% of the vote. We've got the Enhedslisten, or the Red-Green Alliance, coming in at 5.5%. That's about the same as last time. Not really anything to note there. I think they might be looking at potentially serving as confidence and supply. But, they'll potentially be looking at confidence and supply for a red bloc plus the moderates. However, with just 5.5%, I think they'll be disappointed. I think they were hoping for quite a better result than this. We've got Radikale Venstre, or the Social Liberals, 5.1%. I think they'll be fairly happy with this. This is, slightly better than last time. Last time they did have a very, very poor election, following both internal scandals and then the fact that they essentially toppled the first Mette Frederiksen government, which a lot of people found to be quite weird because in the following election, they then ended up supporting her as prime ministerial candidate. And then we've got the alternative, 2.7%. That means that they clear the 2% threshold. They'll be happy with that, even though they're losing, I think, one mandate. They'll still be decently pleased with that. There was a lot of talk going into this election that they might not cross that threshold, but that won't be a problem now. It would seem. Who knows? Stuff can still happen. And then finally, we've got Borgernes Parti, the Citizens Party, which is, I mentioned it at the start, this new force in Danish politics. It was founded just in 2024, I believe. It's national conservative, and it's very, very populist and critical of the elite. Sometimes some people will call it borderline conspiratorial. Now that seems to be entering Parliament as well at 2.5%. Cool. So that's the situation as it is right now. I'm just going to put myself in the front here. Lovely. I will be having another look going through some comments. Let's see here. Someone asking, when will the counting be finished? I mean, it's going fairly quickly. It will almost certainly be finished at midnight, if not before then. I see more people discussing the threshold. Someone suggesting a 5% threshold would only kick out 2 parties. Some people asking about different government constellations. And some people asking about how much these few seats between blue and red bloc make of a difference. So let's go through that. I've already sort of touched on this threshold. I don't think it's enough of a political conversation for it to really have a massive influence on the debate in the coming time. I don't think people will be debating this, and I don't think it will change anytime soon. Then let's take, what do I think the likeliest government constellation will be? As I've mentioned previously, even as everything is sort of up in the air as to will it be the red bloc or blue bloc who gets the most seats, now that prognostics suggest the exit polls might have been off, I still think the likeliest government is a coalition between the moderates, the Social Democrats, the Green Left, and the Social Liberals. So that's the 3 sort of government-ready parties in the left bloc, plus the moderates, and then you'd have the Red-Green Alliance, which is the furthest left party you have serving as confidence and supply. It would require the leader of the moderates to backtrack on some of his statements about not wanting to be in a government supported by the Red-Green Alliance, but at the end of the day, I think he's going to be okay doing that. And then what was the final question? Might not have been one. Someone asking about the way that the election system works in Denmark. So that's actually quite interesting. Let's talk about that for a second. And we'll have a look at, I think DR might have the best map for this. So let's just extend the screen here for DR. And we'll hop over to, let's see, don't they have, they've normally got a map somewhere. Yeah, I just need to scroll down. Cool. So Denmark is split into, let me just readjust the screen size here so that it's as easy to look at as possible. Lovely. So Denmark is split into 10 big constituencies, which are then further split into these sort of smaller, different, what would you call it? They're not really constituencies as much as they are just areas that count votes together. And then within each of these smaller constituencies, you've then got all of these different election polling places. So what happens on election night is you've got, everyone goes down and votes, and you only vote for one person or party, much like in many other elections. But then you can either vote for a candidate or you can vote for a person, specifically from one of the parties. And if the person you vote for a specific party doesn't get elected, your vote then still goes to the party. Then you've got, in the larger constituencies, they are multi-member, and then you allocate a certain amount of MPs based on the way that the results have fallen in that larger constituency. And that uses the D'Hondt method, which some of you might be familiar with. And then after that, there are 40 seats, which are called leveling seats, which then make up for any discrepancies from out with the multi-member constituencies. That gives you 175 different MPs. There are then 2 additional MPs elected for Greenland and 2 more elected for the Faroe Islands. Altogether, this gets the 179. If we focus on mainland Denmark for a bit, it is a very, very proportional system. If you get 10% of the vote, you're going to get quite close to that in terms of seats, about 10%. There are little kinks here and there. At the last election, there was a lot of talk of a slight discrepancy where the Social Democrats actually got 1 more seat than the arithmetic probably said that they should have because of a little kink of the system. But generally speaking, it's very, very proportional, which is also why we've got this many parties that are seemingly on their way into parliament. Now that I'm on here again, I am actually just going to look to see if this has changed. And there we go. Red bloc is leading again. I think the exit polls were probably more accurate than the DR prognostic was suggesting. And if we turn to TV2, they've got a prognostic now as well. Previously, they had Red bloc to 86 seats. They've now got it to 83. A slight decrease, but this was actually quite close to what DR had on their exit poll. I think this is a case of the exit polls actually being quite decent and the prognostics maybe struggling a bit. But, you know, who knows? Things can still change. We've only just counted 51% of the vote. And if we turn down here to the parties, once again, Social Democrats on track for a poor result. It could have been worse. Socialistisk Folkeparti, or the Green Left, maybe not as good as they were hoping for, but still, I mean, when I say not as good as they were hoping for, that is considering the fact that they were, you know, hoping for maybe 13% of the vote, which is a lot for that party. And being the second largest party is still a massive deal for the Green Left. We've got Venstre now leading as the biggest party in Blue Bloc, which they'll be quite content with. They'll be hoping for more than 10.5% because that's still an atrocious result for them. And I think that would be the worst ever result for Venstre in its current formation. Danish People's Party, now the second largest party in Blue Bloc. They'll be very happy with that. Liberal Alliance still third. Moderates and Kingmaker role. Yeah, everything else looks like it did before. Lovely. Well, I'll have another look at the chat to see what's happening there. Oh, don't know why that's in front of me. There we go. Lovely. Let's see what's going on here. Bum, bum, bum. And I'll just scroll up. If I don't answer your question, do ask it again. I'm very sorry. A lot of things going on, keeping tabs of what's going on, plus trying to read these questions. Someone's asking quite an interesting one here. How important do you think these quizzes on, for example, DR to see which candidate you agree with the most are? My Danish colleagues seem to have decided who to vote for based on that. That's a really, really interesting question and something a lot of people are talking about. So going into these elections, the second that the election is called, all of the big, both TV stations and newspapers, they create this test where you can go in, you're asked, you know, what do you think about immigration? What do you think about the climate? What do you think about infrastructure? All these questions, I think most of them have it at about 24 questions, something like that. And then they match you with a candidate in your area that they argue you are the closest to ideologically. Now, a lot of politicians game this system. They know that if they, you know, some answers are more popular than others. They know that, you know, if you normally stick in towards the middle, because it's normally like very much agree, somewhat disagree, very much disagree, then you're sometimes safer. So they sit and they game the system. And sometimes it's a bit random. You get politicians who seem to be at the top of everyone's list. And it's based on, you know, only a few questions and very little nuance. And I think you're right. I think, let's just, who asked this question? Mr. Squirtle, I think you're absolutely right. I think a lot of Danes use this, if not to decide on who to vote for, at least to give them some idea as to who maybe a handful of the candidates that they're potentially going to vote for are. I've taken a couple this cycle. I got very, very different results based on which one I took. And I remember getting one where I had both quite right-wing parties and quite left-wing parties at the very top, which made me question sort of the legitimacy of the whole system, where, you know, if two such different candidates can be at the very top of my list for who I agree with the most, chances are there are some kinks to the system that don't quite work. Let's scroll down and see here. There is another one here from Frozen Cat Cake, who asks, what are the main differences between the Denmark Democrats and the Danish People's Party? I think that's a fascinating question. So the Danish People's Party comes from the ashes of the old Progress Party. Danish People's Party founded in 1995. And that then makes it one of the older parties, while the Denmark Democrats was founded in 2022 by Inger Støjberg, a former deputy leader for the party Venstre, for which she was also minister. So they come from slightly different origins. But I think the big difference between them, because they're both quite hardline on immigration, though there are nuances there, the Danish People's Party favors remigration, which the Denmark Democrats are not openly in favor of, at least as of yet. But then the question is about, well, what are their policies on other areas? And the Danish People's Party is very much like a pensioners' party. It is on a lot of political issues. It's Social Democrats light. It is, to some extent, social democratic in its welfare policy, whereas the Denmark Democrats have a lot more focus on farmers and rural interests and small towns, and they make a big campaign both out of, you know, supporting farmers, you know, less regulation on that industry in terms of emission and green stuff, and then also about ensuring that there are good, you know, transport routes for those communities, that there are good services out there, whereas the Danish People's Party appeals more to, you know, your pensioners in towns and maybe even cities, as well as now young people to an extent. But it's that sort of city-rural-urban divide, I think, that's the biggest split between those two parties. Excellent question. Let's see. Someone asking here, is it realistic that any government formation would push for Euro implementation or at least abandoning the opt-outs? Another interesting question. I spoke about this a bit when I was on the live stream for EU Made Simple. There are two parties that are quite adamant about introducing the euro in Denmark. Those are the moderates and the social liberals who belong to Blue Bloc. I don't see them being able to influence a government to go full-blown, let's get the euro in the coming years. I think most people would see that as a bit of a waste of political capital. I think there are things that a lot of parties would rather do first. That being said, I think if there were a referendum on the euro in Denmark, I think you'd be surprised at just how many parties would come out saying, maybe somewhat tentatively, you know, we can get behind this. Currently, the Danish kroner is already pegged to the euro, so practically it wouldn't make that big of a difference in terms of, for example, interest rates or exchange rates. But I think there's also a cultural element, especially people on the right, the National Conservative right, would feel quite hurt in terms of their national pride to lose the Danish kroner, which is, you know, fairly popular in National Conservative circles especially, but also in Denmark at large. I'll take a couple more questions, then I'll go back to looking at some more data as it comes out. Let's see here. I'm going to take notes because someone asked what exactly, let me get the name so I can call you guys out for your excellent questions. Okay, so there's one here on how would foreign policy of Denmark change under a red bloc government, asked by Simon Westhoff, 5121. How would, let's see, red. And then there's A question about DF and remigration from the Balls One. Also good question. And let's see. And let's take, how did the moderates become kingmakers? This is a very interesting question from, let me try not to lose the person asking the question. I want to give a shout out. That's Nickerson. Cool. First question. Foreign policy under a red government, I don't think would be different whatsoever. A red government would almost certainly be led by Mette Frederiksen, who has been, someone who's really profiled herself on foreign defense, security, all of this stuff. Hardline against Russia, fairly hard tone against the US now that we've had all of these threats about Greenland, and someone who favors massive increases to Danish military, both spending and capabilities. She would be prime minister, and a red bloc, I still think, is very, very unlikely unless you have the moderates, who are led by Lars Løkke Rasmussen, who is the current foreign minister, and someone else who very supportive of Ukraine, very pro-NATO, more so than the prime minister, and someone who is very, very engaged in the Danish kingdom. That means, the inclusion of Greenland and the Faroe Islands. So I don't think it would change. The next question was about the Danish People's Party and remigration. So the question specifically asked about exactly what the Danish People's Party wants to do in terms of remigration. The nitty-gritty is a little bit uncertain, but the argument is that there are a lot of people who live in Denmark legally, some who even have citizenship, who don't follow Danish norms and standards and don't fit into the Danish culture. Maybe they don't speak the language. Maybe they have undemocratic views. They have illiberal views on women or on LGBT issues. And their argument then is that those people shouldn't be in Denmark and that Denmark should work at effectively getting them out of the country over a period of time. They've been a bit wishy-washy on it. The social liberals were out ahead of the campaign trying to paint their this policy in the way that the social liberals saw it. And now there's a court case actually about to go on soon because the Danish People's Party are suing the social liberals over the interpretation of the Danish People's Party's plans on remigration. So the nitty-gritty is a bit uncertain, but the Danish People's Party has been pushing this quite a lot. And I think remigration is something we'll be discussing for months and years to come. I think it's a new sort of idea that's entered the Danish zeitgeist. It's still not a majority view, at least if this election result were to dictate that. But I think it's something you'd be surprised at just how many Danes would potentially support. And then the last question I'd selected was how the moderates became kingmakers. Where did their members come from? That's really, really interesting, where their voters came from. Because as I said earlier in this live stream, at the end of last year, it looked like the moderates might not even clear that 2% threshold. They're now obviously on course for not quite as well of an election as last time, but still a pretty decent one. So the question is, who's voting for them? And I think it's a lot of people who might, had it been 10 years ago, had it been the political system of 10 years ago, voted for the social liberals. It's people in the middle. It is people who might watch a debate and go, I actually think a lot of people had good ideas. It's predominantly, at least, this is data I remember reading from the last election, when after the election they looked into who voted for which parties and what can that tell you about demographics. Back then it was younger people, it was professional people, in the job market, in more sort of white collar work. And as I said, it was a lot of sort of young adults. So I'd imagine it's probably a somewhat similar group of people who have come out this time around. But we'll see. It'll be interesting to see all the data afterwards. And then I'll just quickly scroll through here just to see if there are any really exciting questions. All questions are exciting and I appreciate all the comments. But just for the sake of time. Cool, nice. All right, let me hop over and we'll look at some more data once again. Nothing's really changed with the DR prognostic, and only a small change to the TV2 one, but I think it's worth having a look at anyways. And then also in about 15 minutes, I'll take a quick break. I'll go get a cup of coffee, and then I'll be back in about 10 minutes after that. Alrighty. So I'll just share my screen once again so that we can have a look at the data together. There we go. You guys should be able to see that. Cool. So DR has red bloc with 81, the moderates with 14, and blue bloc with 80. Again, the likeliest situation here, I really still think it is that red bloc plus the moderates government that will come out of this. I'll just make this smaller so that you guys can also see me, if that's something you guys want. There we go. And if we hop over to TV2, they've got 83 for red bloc, 78 for blue bloc, and 14 for the moderates. Again, the likeliest outcome here, I really reckon, is red bloc plus the moderates. Do let me know in the chat if someone has another interesting idea for what a coalition could look like. I'll also at some point do some maths to see if there's a interesting idea at a grand coalition. I just think the red lines have been drawn so intensely by a lot of the party leaders in terms of a grand coalition that it's very unlikely that that comes about. Shall we have a look at some headlines, see what the different medias are suggesting? Okay, so here we've got, let's see if, I think you guys can all see this. Oh, I've got a prognostic going on behind there. I'll delete that. There we go. So here we've got an analysis saying that the Social Democrats and Venstre will be slightly happy after this. These new prognostics suggest they haven't done quite as bad as the exit polls suggest. I think especially Venstre will look at even just the prognostics now after they're still not great for blue bloc, suggest Venstre being the largest party in blue bloc, which they'll be thrilled with. I think there would be a serious identity crisis in Venstre if they were not the biggest party in blue bloc. Here we've got drama in blue bloc. The parties fight to be the largest. And then let's see. Aha, this will be Bornholm. Cool. So the first of these multi-member constituencies has now been counted. This is Bornholm, which is a small island fairly close to Sweden, the far east in Denmark. They've only got 2 seats, so that's a fairly easy multi-member constituency to count up. And here it seems that the Social Democrats are going to get 1 seat and Venstre will get the other, which is what traditionally happens. And I think something that both those parties will be quite happy with, because if either of them didn't get a seat in Bornholm, serious questions would be asked. Serious questions will be asked anyways, but I think that would be seen as a massive defeat for them. Cool. Let's hop over back here. We'll just move me up in the front and I'll look at some more comments. This is the last round of comments just for now I'll have a look at. I will go have a cup of coffee and then I'll be back. What about Step Jukla, STEPAJUKLA 4070 asks, what about the monarchy? Is it a debate in Denmark? The short answer is no. There are parties who have anti-monarchy views. The Red Green Alliance, or Enhedslisten as it's called in Danish, is an anti-monarchist party. The Social Liberals are formally now an anti-monarchy party, and historically the Social Democrats have also been at least skeptical of the monarchy. I reckon the Green Left as well. I actually don't know. Let me know in the comments if you do know. People don't talk about this. The monarchy is very popular in Denmark. The previous queen we had was very popular, and the king that we now have also seems to be quite popular. So no, this is not something that's really up for debate, at least not anytime soon. Let's see here. Then, let's see. We've got a suggestion from Cheesy Peasy Snake. What do you think about S, which is the Social Democrats, plus V, which is Venstre, plus M, which is the moderates, plus R, which is Radikale Venstre, or the Social Liberals, plus K, which is the Conservatives? I imagine this is as a potential government coalition constellation, and the short answer is very unlikely. Purely because that's 5 parties. If I remember correctly, the biggest government Denmark's ever seen has been with 4 parties in a coalition together. This is 5 parties. In theory, they could push 1 or 2 of the parties out to be confidence and supply. The problem with that is who? It would probably naturally be the Social Liberals. They'd be furious with that. I don't think they would allow it. I think that they'd then rather not support the government. If they tried to push out the moderates would say the exact same thing. And I think there's maybe also going to be a sense in Venstre at this point that they can't be a part of another grand coalition. They need to go back to to workshop their project and figure out, this was a terrible election. What are we going to do? How are we going to be that broad party we once used to be? But, I mean, there are very few red lines that are drawn in such a formation between those 5 parties. The only one I can think of is Venstre have been out saying they wouldn't work with the Social Liberals. That was in a post that Venstre leader Troelsund Poulsen made on Facebook a couple of days ago. I reckon that that's something he could backtrack on purely just because it's, no offense to Troelsund Poulsen, a fairly silly thing for Venstre to say. The Social Liberals have historically been a centrist party, a party that both blocs could work with, and if he's drawing a red line at them and not the Social Democrats, I think that's a miscalculation, one he could probably quietly push back. Let's have a look at a couple more questions. This is an interesting one. Kieran515. How does a coalition split ministers up? Excellent question. Internally. And it depends on relative strength within the coalition. Some parties are going to be stronger than others. They're going to have more seats. They're going to be more important during the government negotiations because, for example, the moderates. If the moderates pull out of negotiations, that's more or less mission failed by whoever's trying to form that coalition. So the moderates have really strong playing cards in terms of saying, we want this ministerial portfolio, or we want, this amount of ministers. So the stronger parties tend to do better. Then there are also sort of interesting little quirks. A party like the Social Liberals, they have a strategy, which is often they want the economy minister post, which is nowhere near as powerful as the finance minister, but it's a more ideological post, which they historically have almost always when they're in a coalition. So if they end up in a coalition, let's see, there's a good chance they take that one. Let's look for a couple more questions. David KN4HB says, what is the name of the website where I can do the possible coalition formations? I checked on this website. Unfortunately, it's not updating as the prognostics are coming out. You can still go in there to play around if you want. What you need to do, I think the easiest way to find it is search TV2 Byg en Regering. BYG space EN space REGERING. That should get you that site. I assume that's the site that you watched me play around with on the other live stream I did with EU Made Simple. All right. This is a really interesting question from Mr. Manafon. If somehow Mette, that is Mette Frederiksen, the current prime minister, doesn't end up being PM, is that the end for her as the party leader? The short answer is yes. At least I think so. I mean, I could be wrong. This is an analysis. It's not hardcore fact. But Mette Frederiksen has already been out during this campaign suggesting or hinting at this being the last election where she'll be leader of the Social Democrats. That makes me think at some point, maybe towards the end of this government period, if she's made prime minister again, she'll resign and there'll be a leadership contest in the Social Democrats, and she'll be replaced ahead of the next election. If she somehow doesn't become prime minister now, again, I don't think she'd see any point in sticking around as an opposition leader. I just don't. She's already sort of suggested that within the next couple of years, she'll be on her way out. Why would she stick around for that? And there's something, and this isn't just Danish politics, but generally, if you do poorly in an election and you don't have power after it, that party will want to just reconsider its ideological standings, the way that it tries to position itself, the different groups of people it appeals to. There'll be a big sort of internal reevaluation, and it would just make sense to have someone else take charge of that evaluation. So I think if she's not the prime minister after coalition negotiations are done, I think that'll be the last we've seen of her in Danish politics. That being said, though, I think there's a very good chance she continues to be PM and sticks around for another couple of years. And then let's take one last question. And then I will take a quick 15-minute break, and then I'll be back on here. Let's see. Oh, just got a super chat. Might as well take that then. I'll go back up and look once I come back from all of the, or from my little break. But let's see here. Adventurous Gold. DF wants to move the Overton window, allowing them to slowly dismantle the international conventions. They're slowly handing the EU to Putin in harmony with other ultra-nationalist parties? Question mark. So, first of all, let's start with the Overton window, because you're absolutely right. The Danish People's Party have massively moved the Danish Overton window. That's not a recent development. They did that in the very, very beginning of the 21st century. Maybe even slightly before it, I think you could argue, when they brought immigration to the fore of Danish politics. Immigration was a bigger issue in Danish politics than it was in most other European countries back in the early 2000s, and that was because of the Danish People's Party. They then became mainstream. They were confidence and supply to a series of Venstre-led governments in the sort of first decade of this century. They then came back. They became the second largest party in 2015, where they had a bunch of influence under another government under Venstre, where they were confidence and supply. So they've massively shifted the Overton window. That's why, you know, Denmark became famous for having these hardline immigration policies quite early. And it's also why the Social Democrats, while they were in opposition between 2015 to 2019, massively moved rightwards on immigration policy and rhetoric, because they realized that they were losing a lot of voters to the Danish People's Party, and they needed to stop this voter bleeding. So again, they've massively moved the window. Now today, they're talking about remigration, which is another shift rightwards. And they've, generally speaking, moved more rightwards under their new leader, Morten Messerschmidt. Other parties haven't jumped onto the remigration bandwagon yet. I think they could. There is the Citizens Party, which is a very small party I've mentioned already. They're in favor of remigration as well. That isn't really because of the Danish People's Party. I think that's just the DNA of that party. But that being said, I think remigration could be something that comes up more and more in the coming years, especially now that the Danish People's Party is having a bit of a resurgence. Cool. The second part of this question, I'm treating it as a two-parter. I realize it was also kind of just a general point, but really interesting stuff. They are slowly handing the EU to Putin in harmony with other ultra-nationalist parties. So I think this is more of a statement than it is a question, but there's an interesting sort of aspect to this, because the Danish People's Party have also made a bit of a splash. And again, I think this was at the end of last year that they really started saying this, but where they, as the first Danish party that was elected in 2022 at least, came out saying, we think we're giving too much money to Ukraine as it is. We support Ukraine, but we also think it's a corrupt regime, We are afraid that the money that we're giving them isn't spent properly, and we think we've already spent a lot of money. And Denmark is one of the countries in Europe and internationally who gives the most to Ukraine per capita. What DF has then suggested is that they want to, instead of giving money to Ukraine as these, payments to help them fight the war against Russia, they would instead want to give them as loans. And that's, the policy that the EU has now decided on as a bit of a compromise, especially with other members of Patriots for Europe, which is a grouping in the European Parliament and which is the grouping that the Danish People's Party belongs to. So, you could make an argument that, slowly handing the EU to Putin, strong rhetoric, but I see where you're coming from with that. And then I think the final part is just on the EU and the Danish People's Party. The Danish People's Party has historically been an anti-EU party. They've, for most of their history, wanted to leave the European Union altogether. During this campaign, they came out saying, we're still very EU skeptical. We think there are a bunch of problems with the European Union, but we also think that now is not the right time to leave. So their official position is no longer we need to leave the EU today. And that actually means that Denmark, with this election as well, does not have a single party who is advocating leaving the EU. Previously, the Red Green Alliance, a left-wing party which was anti-EU, also shifted to, now being, I wouldn't say pro-EU, but they're definitely, EU skeptical soft. And then we've got the Citizens Party, who I was reading up on their EU policy. They're very, very critical, but they never, it seems, advocate for leaving. So that's just an interesting little tidbit there about the Danish People's Party and the EU. And with that, I am going to take let's call it a 13-minute break. I will be back on here at 22:45. So in 13 minutes. Hope to see you all then, and I'll answer some more questions and have a look at the prognostics as they keep coming in. Thank you so much. See you guys in a bit. let's just see there. I'm just waiting to make sure that I'm back to everyone and that the stream is back up and running. Let's just wait and see here just to make sure that we get a couple of people in the comments confirming this. Lovely. I'm seeing a couple of comments that we are indeed back and live. Lovely. So what I'm going to do first is I've made a note of some interesting... Also, by the way, if there are issues with something like sound or something, spam the chat just so I'm aware, and I will make sure that that's fixed. Perfect. But I've made a note of some questions I thought were quite interesting. I saw rolling in while I was grabbing a little coffee. So I'm going to quickly go through them. And then after that, we'll turn back to the numbers. And I'm keeping an eye out on the prognostics as they continue to roll in. We're seeing, a lot of votes now starting to be counted. We're closing in on almost 90% of the votes counted. So we're starting to get some quite accurate numbers. No major changes from where we were before I took the break. So I'll start with some questions. One question I made a note of was from Varun Chauhan. Sorry if I'm butchering that name. Where can I watch the votes? I would strongly recommend everyone to go on one of two or both websites, dr.dk, which is the Danish public broadcaster, or tv2.dk, which is another big public service station. They've got very, very good programs running right now where they're showing their prognostics. So I'd strongly recommend you guys open that as well, if you guys have the opportunity for that. Because I'll be on here talking as well, but that's interesting to keep an eye out. I'm keeping an eye out on it right there, but you guys can do it on your own computers. The next question I've got here. Mr. Menafon asks about the Overton window, as I mentioned, shifting to the right on immigration. And this viewer asked, why does it never shift to the left? And I think it does sometimes. And I think it did during this election. Because when the Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, came out and called this election, the first thing that she announced in terms of new policy was the idea of a wealth tax, something that's been pushed especially by the Red Green Alliance party, which is traditionally the most left-wing party in the Danish political spectrum. Is it a major shift on the Overton window? Maybe not, because it's not, something that was thought of as extreme. This is something Denmark has previously had, but then got rid of. But I think it does speak into a larger narrative of a left-wing shift in, especially the Social Democrats, on economic policy that they felt really forced to undertake after last year's very, very poor local election results for them. And after they've realized in the opinion polls that, goodness me, things are not going well for us. So it might not be an Overton shift, but I think that there's a shift in what's considered mainstream economic policy currently underway. Who knows? Maybe that's something that will quietly be rolled back, but it is, I think, something to take note of. The next question, the Balls One asked about young people. And I think this is a really, really interesting question because young voters in Denmark are quite unique from other voters in Denmark in that they've massively come out in favor of some parties that you might not expect young people to necessarily really to really feel like represent them. The biggest of which is Liberal Alliance, this liberal, borderline libertarian, at least from Danish standards, party, who has seen a lot of young people support, especially due to its presence on social media. Its party leader is massive on TikTok. Another party that does very well amongst young people is the Red Green Alliance, this furthest left-wing party, which does well both amongst young people, but also in the big cities, especially in Copenhagen, and which, doesn't seem to have done massively well this election, but the reason it gets the votes it does is because it appeals to young people really, really well. Another party that does very well with young people in this cycle, or has done, it would seem, is the Danish People's Party. like a lot of young Danes, have seemingly moved to the Liberal Alliance. A lot of young people have also moved to the Danish People's Party. And again, the Danish People's Party have a very, very strong social media strategy. I think that plays a big role. And then there's always the old mantra that young people are just more polarized than older voters, which is why you see, massive support for this borderline libertarian party, for the Danish People's Party, and then also for a very, very left-wing party like the Red Green Alliance. Then we've got Adventurous Gold made a point. I believe this is the same viewer who asked about the Danish People's Party on the EU and on Russia-Ukraine. And they made a point. It was a very, very simple comment where they literally just said Marie Krarup, which is a former member of parliament for the Danish People's Party who was and has been quite critical of the support for Ukraine and just generally the very anti-Russia sentiments in Danish politics. I will note, absolutely right, she used to be a member of parliament for the Danish People's Party. She left that party a couple of years ago. I don't think she's returned to it. She might now be a member. I couldn't really say, but she did leave. And I think the Danish People's Party were, at least at that time, very happy that she left because she represented a place where the party didn't want to go at that time and where I think they probably still struggle to be positioned today. But no, that's a very, very good point from Adventurous Gold that, there have been these factions, these little pockets within the Danish People's Party who have been borderline outright Russia supportive. Then I've noticed a lot of people trying to compare US politicians to the Danish party system, which I think is really interesting. A lot of people asking, where would Bernie Sanders, for example, feature? Where would Kamala Harris feature? I always think this is an interesting debate, a thought experiment more than anything else, because in a lot of ways, people on here are right that someone like Bernie Sanders would be considered not super left-wing in Denmark, at least when it comes to economic policy, when it comes to the welfare state. But that being said, I think the reason why that exists is because in Denmark, we've obviously got universal healthcare, we've got a very big welfare state. But I also think Bernie Sanders, correct me if I'm wrong, is supportive of universal dentistry, something that most parties in Denmark aren't, unless you go out to, the pretty far out on the left-wing spectrum. So I think that there are little quirks here and there that would probably position him to the left of the Social Democrats, for example. And then I think something I always find quite interesting is the fact that Bernie Sanders would be incredibly uncomfortable with the center-left to even, sort of middle-left in Denmark's view on immigration. So would a figure like Kamala Harris. The Social Democrats have obviously moved quite significantly to the right on immigration, but the Socialistisk Folkeparti, or the Green Left, have also quietly shifted towards supporting a battle that's currently going on between the Danish government and the Convention on European Rights, on European Human Rights. And they're also, quietly moving towards supporting more deportations of immigrants who commit crime. And I think that's something that would create a lot of uncomfort in the American center-left. Do correct me if I'm wrong. But then you've also got the idea that Denmark's immigration policy right now, in a lot of ways, is to the right of the current Trump administrations in the US, which is sometimes a bit weird to think of because the rhetoric is quite different. Trump is obviously very bombastic about his immigration policy, whereas I think in Denmark it's become quite mainstream that you can have these views and support the government on it and then not be considered, grouped with a movement like MAGA. So just my 2 cents on the Danish on the Danish-US comparison there. But I think it's a really fascinating debate, and you can break it down into a bunch of different things, and US figures can be placed all over the map in the Danish political system. And with that, I think I'm going to take a slight break from the comments and turn to the prognostics. So let me reshare the screen on there. Let's just find the good ones. There we go. There we go. Lovely. Hopefully you guys can see that. All right, I'm gonna make it slightly bigger. And then I'm gonna give space to myself as well. If I can figure out how to do that. There we go. Lovely. So, as you guys can see, we're getting quite close now to where the exit polls had us. You know, substantially, not substantially, what is that? 7 more seats in red bloc than in blue bloc, which when you think about the fact that there's only 179 seats altogether is fairly substantial, actually. This is 90.3% of the vote counted. So we're getting really, really close to a final number here. As I said, I'm if red bloc takes 84 seats, red bloc, of course, being the parties to the left of center, I really struggle seeing a government that doesn't somehow include some formation of the red bloc with the moderates. But we'll turn to that in a second because I've noticed something else interesting happening. If we hop over to TV2, their prognostic says, oh, let me see. I'm just going to share the TV2 one as well. So TV2 is saying something fairly similar here. There we go. They're saying 83, 78, 14. So what is that? That's one change to red and one change to blue. Yeah. With this result, I'm struggling to see much that doesn't include the red bloc. However, and someone else mentioned this in the chat, I've forgotten who it was, but it was an interesting point. Someone suggesting that there could potentially be a social democratic, moderate, Venstre, conservative, and radikale Venstre, or the social liberals as they're called in English, majority. Now, if we take here, and I've just got my nifty little calculator, if we take 38 plus 18 plus 14 plus 13 plus 10, that's 93. That is a majority. That would technically be enough to form a government. I've seen this mentioned now a couple of times in the Danish press. I've seen a couple of analysts pointing towards this as a potential outcome. I really, really struggle to see this personally, but maybe I'm wrong on this. My fear with it, from the negotiator's perspective, is that it's simply too many parties to get together. Too many parties with quite different views. There's also the thing, Venstre have said they won't work with radikale Venstre or the social liberals. I think they can roll back on that, because the whole reason for that was quite silly. It was because the social liberals had been invited to be a part of the current government, but then at the 11th hour, they pulled out of negotiations. So, this could be something that could be overcome. It's the fact that it's 5 parties, and it's 5 parties who would want to be a part of government coalition that sends red alarm bells off in my head. Because 5 parties in a government coalition is a lot. It's, I believe, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, this is more than Denmark has ever had in any government. Now, could you maybe tell the social liberals, hey guys, you guys are going to be confidence and supply? Maybe. But I think the social liberals have taken a lot of heat internally and externally for not joining the last government. I think they would be afraid to not join the next government if they're in a position where they could do so. Maybe you could also exclude the moderates from being a part of a government, but they've got the deciding seats here. I think Lars Løkke Rasmussen, who is the leader of the moderates, he's a former prime minister back when he was leader of Venstre. He's currently the foreign minister. He's a very, very talented politician in terms of the nitty-gritty deal-making. So I really struggle to see him going, okay, cool, I'm not going to be a minister. I think that would be wild. Could the Conservatives support it without being a part of the coalition, again, I struggle to see that. This is, again, one of their mantras is borgerlige stemmer, der arbejder. Right-wing voices that work, that go to work. The argument there being that, a vote for the Conservatives is a vote for people who will take responsibility and will try to get results. So, again, I struggle to see that. And then Venstre, they're just off of a terrible election result. They wouldn't sit out a coalition government if that means that they'd be confident and supply. I think that would be the straw that breaks the camel's back for a lot of members of that party. And then the Social Democrats, as the biggest party, would not ever be a part of a government where they're not, at the very least, a member of the coalition, but also most likely, almost certainly, be the leader of that government. But it is an interesting thought experiment. But it also raises the point that if you want another one of these grand coalitions, you need a lot of parties to be involved. It would take these 5 parties to form a majority. You couldn't cut one of them out and still have a majority. And the only other party that would maybe be susceptible to that kind of grand coalition work would be Socialistisk Folkeparti, or the Green Left. That's the pink one here, second place. But again, they've made it a red line. They won't work with Venstre in a government. They won't work with the Conservatives. So I struggle to see that one as well. But it's interesting nonetheless, and I think there was a commentator on there who was out with that idea before I saw it on the news, so massive respect to you. A lot of political commentators are flirting with the same idea that you suggested in the comments. Shall we have one last look at the prognostics? Let's see. Maybe not. No, nothing's changed. Never mind. We'll come back to the prognostics shortly. Let me look at some. I don't like why does that happen? If I move me, okay, I'm at the front now. Lovely. Let me have another look at the comments to see if there are any other interesting questions. There's someone saying, as an American, I hope Denmark wins this election. That's a lovely sentiment. Thank you, Hunter C5S9G. I think Denmark does win this election in the sense that it's Danish parties that are being elected to the Danish parliament based on votes from Danes. So no matter who takes government, Denmark wins. And it's a high election turnout, it seems. That's a big win for democracy, generally. I'm just going to scroll up a bit. I see now several people. This is the first one I saw, so if someone else mentioned it before, I'm very sorry, but I'm going to credit this just for now to Veris and I. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. Social Democrats, the Green Left, Venstre, and the Moderates as a potential coalition. Let me quickly check the arithmetic on that. I think it works. So what was it? It was the Social Democrats with... We'll go with DR's prognostics just for now. There's slight differences still with TV2s, but we're in the marginals. 18 plus the moderates, 14. So that gets us to 90. That is a majority. But as I've sort of mentioned before, the Green Left have made it quite clear they don't want to work with Venstre, and Venstre have likewise said they don't want to work with the Green Left. So I struggle to see that. The Green Left are in a brilliant position electorally in terms of their result. It might not have been as much as they expected, but they're still looking to be the second largest party, so credit to them. They might be able to, backtrack on something and still have some degree of credibility with their voters, or at least they won't lose enough support for it to be terminal. Whereas I think if Venstre go out and break another one of their core promises on who they'd work with in government to form such a majority, I really struggle to see the members accepting that. And the reason I say another one is because in 2022, the last election in Denmark, the Venstre had throughout the whole election said, we are not going to allow Mette Frederiksen to be prime minister. We simply won't join any government with Mette Frederiksen as PM, only to then go out after the election, after government negotiations, to make Mette Frederiksen prime minister. And that was massively controversial in the party, amongst its members, even internally amongst its MP group. And it saw a big fall in the opinion polls for them. So I struggle to see that, but hey, it's anyone's game. The moderates have become kingmakers, and the next weeks or maybe even months could be really, really strange in terms of government formations we might never have expected. So we'll scroll through and see. Someone confirming 4 is the record. Yes, I assume that's for amount of parties in a coalition, so that's good to hear. William Nettles Jr., 3323, asks, is H certain to pass the 2% threshold? Now, H being the Borgernes Parti, the Citizens Party. And this is the party with the fewest votes out of the 12 parties that were on the ballot. And they are currently in both the prognostics from both the DR and TV2 at 2.1%. At this point, let me just see how many votes have been counted. We are at 94% of the vote counted. I am very confident that they'll get into Parliament. Because the threshold, as I mentioned, is 2%. So it would require quite a massive shock in the last 5% of the votes that haven't been counted yet for this party to not get into Parliament. Ooh, Ketchup Blood 94 says a social democratic, moderate, Venstre conservative Denmark Democrat, I assume coalition, is more likely. Mostly agree on immigration, unlike Radikale Venstre or the social liberals, and also agree on being liberal on business. I see your point. I think this is a very, very blue-heavy government. You've got Venstre, the Conservatives, and the Denmark Democrats. I don't think the Social Democrats would go along with that. And I think the Social Democrats have other options that they'd rather go with first. And you say that they also generally agree on being liberal on business. In the Social Democrats' iteration in the current government, you're kind of right. In the version of the party that they've been during this campaign, I don't think that's as true as it was 3.5 weeks ago before this election was called. And they've made a lot of quite economically, center-left, left-wing suggestions. So I really struggle to see them going along with, especially the Denmark Democrats. Also because of some of the issues that have been big in this election, which I might actually get to just now. One of the biggest issues has been around drinking water in Denmark, where the Social Democrats have joined the Red Bloc in coming out against agriculture's use of pesticides that's seeping into the groundwater, whereas the Denmark Democrats have been very supportive of agriculture. And I think that's a massive issue during this campaign, and I think it'll be quite a big issue during potential government negotiations. And with that, let's actually turn to, so I talked about this when I was on the live stream for EU Made Simple, but two of the biggest debates during this election were not your traditional debates that are normally brought up in Danish elections. First of all, it's Danish drinking water quality. This is sort of a kind of out of nowhere policy area you wouldn't really expect to be this big during a campaign, but I'd argue it was maybe the biggest, except for another one I'll get to shortly. What's happened is that research has shown that 55% of Danish drinking water is contaminated to some extent with pesticides. Of that, there's about 13%, which is over the limit value for what's considered good drinking water. And what happens is that pesticides that are used in agriculture essentially seep down from the soil into the groundwater, which is the water used for your normal tap water, which is normally which has historically been of a very high quality in Denmark. This has created a massive debate about whether you should ban pesticide use in places where it could get into the groundwater. And the left bloc have all been out with some of the greener parties in the front saying, this is absolutely unacceptable. We need clean drinking water. The Conservatives from the right bloc have also agreed with them. They've sort of joined that bandwagon. And then you've had a couple of parties on the right who have sort of, been a bit wishy-washy. But one party that hasn't been wishy-washy is the Denmark Democrats. They are a rural interest party as well as national conservative and immigration critical. And because of that, they have very much rejected this. And they've, in the last couple of days, argued that there's been a bit of an unfair attack on agriculture altogether during this campaign. Because that also gets on to the next big topic during this campaign, which was the Danish pork industry. Pork is a big industry in Denmark, but at the end of last year, a documentary came out. And this documentary didn't really say that many new things, but it sparked the debate. The documentary found a lot of very, very poor conditions for pigs in Danish farms. It had footage showing pigs that were in way too enclosed spaces and that were malnourished and all kinds of things. So a lot of stats have been brought up. I've made some notes in my notebook. One of the stats you've heard a lot during this campaign is that 25,000 pigs die a day in Denmark, not from slaughter, but from mistreatment and disease and malnourishment and all of these things. That's really filled a lot during this debate. You walk down the street, and if you're in one of the cities, you see posters from especially both the Alternative, the Green Party, and then the Red Green Alliance saying, we need better conditions for our pigs. You've also had this whole idea of tail docking, which is essentially clipping off the tail of a pig to make life easier for the farmer, which is illegal to do systematically in Denmark, but still 95% of pigs are tail docked, and that's been massively debated as well, with a lot of parties. Again, Alternative out in front with sort of the Red Green Alliance right next to them, saying that we need to be a lot stricter on the rules and making sure that farmers follow them. This was a very long way of saying that the Denmark Democrats have placed themselves on one end, they are on the farmers' side, and then the Social Democrats have felt kind of forced to, it would seem, but they're also now making the argument that this is, part of the Social Democratic ideology, but they're now siding with the other left-wing red parties. So I think, at the end of the day, the Social Democrats and the Denmark Democrats getting together is a long shot. But again, this result is confusing and strange, so anything can happen. All right, I'm going to scroll down. I'm going to look at some comments. I don't know how. Stipeadzic, Stipeadzic 7212. What is the difference between Green Left and Red Green Alliance? Excellent question. So these are both parties to the left of the Social Democrats. Both of them come out of some form of the socialist movement, or even in the Red Green Alliance is partially out of the communist movement. The difference between them is positioning. So the Social Democrats are it varies, either a small step or a medium-sized step to the left of the Social Democrats, but the two of them tango quite a bit. If the Social Democrats move somewhere, the Green Left sort of moves there as well, but still with that step leftwards. Whereas the Red Green Alliance is more just, traditionally the furthest left party on the spectrum. There are also a couple of differences in the way that they act. So the Green Left is a party that is generally considered to be government able. They could be a coalition partner. The Red Green Alliance is not considered that by any of the other parties. So the Green Left is more likely to be in a coalition, whereas the Red Green Alliance is very unlikely to be in a coalition. And a big part of that is because of foreign and defense policy. Until very recently, the Red Green Alliance broadly favored leaving both the EU and NATO. They've now moved to being kind of skeptical of both organizations, but not fully in favor of leaving. And they've also been quite critical of Danish defense all around. And whereas the Green Left have been a part of this massive electoral parliamentary majority around really stepping up Danish defense capabilities. So those are, I'd say, broadly the big differences. They've also got historical differences, but that's a whole other story. I hope that sort of answered the question. Let's see here. So I've got a question here from, is that Hussein 5033 or Hussein 5033? Theoretically, if the blue bloc would win, and the largest blue bloc party at 11%, is this justifiable? Now I'm just checking here, 96% counted. Blue bloc has no chance of winning now. But let's look at this as a hypothetical, as a what if. Yeah, I mean, it would kind of have to be. What you've seen in blue bloc is you've now got, you've got 6 parties in blue bloc, 5 of which are what you'd call medium-sized parties. That's just the way that the cards fall now. I think that if there were a majority, which there won't be, they would still, justifiably be able to say, we've still got the majority here, even if it's split across multiple parties. Someone's going to have to be prime minister. It might be the party with the biggest seat percentage, or it might be the party with the PM candidate with the most experience. But at the end of the day, if there were a majority there, they would form it, and it would be justifiable in the sense that they've got the seats, and the government then just sort of follows naturally in lockstep with that. Alrighty. All right, I've got Orange Timiot, Orange Timiot 9416. Now that the polls are closing, now that the polls are closing in, do you think it's going to be Social Democrat, SF, the Green Left, Venstre, and the moderates in government? No, I don't. I think the Green Left, Venstre friction will be too strong. I really, really don't think Venstre could see themselves in a government with the Green Left. The Green Left also can't see themselves in a government with Venstre, but they might have a little bit more wiggle room to make it happen. But I really, really struggle to see that. I do think this will be a case of, and I still think this. I'm seeing a lot of other guesses out there, but I'm still on the moderates joining the red bloc and forming a social democratic-led government with the Green Left, with the social liberals, and with the moderates all in government, and then with support from the Red-Green Alliance. But who knows? All right. Let's see here. Nil Animation 99. What are the chances that DF will work with the Social Democrats? Very small. If we're talking government formation, practically non-existent. The Danish People's Party campaign for the past year or so has effectively been that the Social Democrats say that they're hard line on immigration, but the data suggests something else. And what they often point to is data which suggests that the amount of immigrants who come into Denmark from Muslim-majority countries is substantially higher than the amount of those people leaving the country. So that there's been a big increase in the net amount of people from predominantly Muslim countries in the country. I think that they would feel and appear to be quite, what would you call it? They'd be chancers if they jumped into some form of social democratic-led government. So I really struggle to see that. That being said, though, once the government is in place, if there are various agreements, pieces of legislation, I could see them working together. And I could also see them not just working together on immigration, which I think they would struggle on a bit if the social liberals and the moderates are also in a government with the social democrats, but I could see them working together with the social democrats on welfare policy. This is somewhere where they've sort of got a kind of similar stance on a lot of issues, and this is something we saw quite a lot in the first Mette Frederiksen government, where she had her government, which was minority. It was supported by by red bloc, and then she had a lot of different constellations that she would go to when it was about different political areas. So when it was immigration, she'd normally turn to members of blue bloc and work with them, and when it was about the economy, she'd turn to most of red bloc, except for the social liberals, who are more liberal and therefore less economically left-wing, and then she'd chuck them out of negotiations, and then, well, she wouldn't chuck them out of negotiations, but she wouldn't come to deal with them, and instead she'd bring in the Danish People's Party, and she'd reach some agreement with a mostly red bloc, and then plus the Danish People's Party. So I could see that continuing, but any coalition, absolutely not. Let's see here. Ukraine Matters says, with Venstre coming in third, are you rethinking expectation of resignation of Troelston Poulsen? Yeah, I think I am. I mean, he's bound to resign during this electoral period, I think, because this is an atrocious election for Venstre, even if they do end up in third place, which is terrible for Venstre, even if they end up being the largest party in Blue Bloc. What I could see is that his resignation will be postponed by a bit, because he'll now be joining he'll now be joining the coalition negotiations, at least for a bit. He might then choose to leave at some point. He might be removed from negotiations, but I think he'll lead the party through these negotiations. I could be wrong, though. Maybe he resigns in 2 minutes. I haven't seen any notifications that he's resigned just yet. I might have missed something, but I doubt it. So, yeah, I could imagine he will resign in the not too distant future, but I don't think it will be tonight anymore. So, yeah, good question. Let's see here. We're on the topic of resignations. We have Alexis Rotti, 6371. You mentioned on EU Made Simple stream that there are usually resignations. Yes. What do you expect in terms of resignations from these results? I think the likely situation now is there won't be a resignation tonight. I think the likely situation is Mette Frederiksen continues to be Prime Minister, so she definitely won't resign. I think, as I mentioned, Troelston Poulsen, the leader of Venstre, is now less inclined to resign because he's still got a bit of an argument to be the leader of the party going into negotiations. And then, you've got parties where the leader would never be pressured to resign. The moderates, for example, that is very much a Lars Løkke Rasmussen project. He's the founder and the leader of the party. A party like the Denmark Democrats, Inger Støjberg, their founder and leader, she wouldn't resign. It's her party. The Citizens Party, its founder and leader, Lars Boje Mathiesen, wouldn't resign. Again, it's his party, and he just cleared the threshold. Let's see here. There's a news notification. Okay, nothing serious. And then the Conservatives had a pretty good election. The Green Left had a pretty good election. The Red-Green Alliance, they don't normally resign early because they've got pretty short terms as leaders. Then, what other parties? The Alternative, they cleared the threshold. They'll probably not have their leader resign. The Social Liberals had a pretty decent election. Their leader probably won't resign. So yeah, I actually think this will be a resignation-free election night and a day or two to come. And then maybe Troelston Poulsen, the leader of Venstre, might resign in the not-too-distant future. Alrighty. Okay, Bastiat691. It will be an SVM government, Jonas. You can take that to the bank. Lars has no reason whatsoever to accept SF, the Green Left, being in government instead of Venstre. No, he doesn't. But you know who does? Is Venstre. I don't think they'd be able to get a lot out of a government well, first of all, they don't have a majority with the Social Democrats and the moderates. Then maybe you could, force one of the five-party coalition that we were talking about before, where they have the Social Liberals joining and where they've got the Conservatives. I don't think the Social Democrats would accept that. And if there are people if there's someone with maybe not as much power in negotiations right now as Lars Løkke Rasmussen, the leader of the moderates, but pretty close, it is Mette Frederiksen, the leader of the Social Democrats and the biggest party, it would seem. So I might take you up on that. I might take it to the bank, but we shall see. Anything can happen, and it will be very interesting weeks and months to come. I've got my theory, I've got my prediction, but it could be anyone's game. Shall we have a quick look now at the data as it comes in, we're now at 97.5%. So I think, we're really starting to get to the end of results here. I will share my screen again. Boom. Oh, I see a really good question there as well, though. I'll make a note of it. All right. Here we go. Lovely. And we'll just move that so you guys can still see me. We'll move me so you guys get the full view of me. There we go. All right. DR, 84 seats for the for the red bloc, 14 seats for the moderates, and 77 seats for the blue bloc. So let's look at how that plays out in the parties. So that's Social Democrats 38, Green Left 20, Venstre 18, Liberal Alliance 16, Danish People's Party 16, Moderates 14, Conservatives 13, the Red Green Alliance 11, the Social Liberals at 10, the Denmark Democrats at 10, the Alternative at 5, and the Citizens Party at 4. Yeah, so this is a bad election result for the Social Democrats. That story's done and dusted. It is written. Is it as bad as it could have been? No. But it's still, I believe, do correct me if I'm wrong, but it is still, I think, the worst election result for the party in 120 years. That's not good. It is the third election where Mette Frederiksen is standing as prime minister and as party leader. It's not common for Danish politicians to last that long. So, credit to her in that sense. She has been, able to hold on for quite a while. And this result, in my view, suggests she'll hold on a few more years. The Green Left, I think they were expecting more, but coming in at second place with 20 seats, 11.6% of the vote, that's still really, really good for the party. We're grading parties here on a curve, because I could have seen them coming in with 13% of the vote here. 20 seats and 11.6% is slightly less than I expected. I think it's slightly less than a lot of people in that party expected, but it is still very, very good for a party who, not that long ago, a couple of decades, was a fairly fringe party, and today is seen as a more serious party, is seen as a potential party of government, but which is still not one of the two big parties now coming in larger than one of the two big parties. So let's turn to Venstre. Venstre at 18 seats, that's 5 less than last election, 10.2%. It is bad. It could have been worse. It could have been not the biggest party in Blue Bloc. But if we're looking 18 seats and 10.2% for what is traditionally one of the two big parties, it is very, very unfortunate for them. Liberal Alliance, 4th place, 16 seats at 9.4% of the vote. I think they'll be disappointed. Again, this is, it's better than last election. It's very good for this party, which in the 2019 election almost didn't clear the threshold. Their party leader that year didn't get reelected. This is a party that's come from absolute meltdown to now being the 4th largest party, 16 seats, very close to being the largest party in Blue Bloc. This is good, but it's not as good as I think they were hoping and expecting. The Danish People's Party, this is probably the biggest success story of the night, if you will. They've gone from absolute meltdown just in the last election to now being, the 5th largest party, 16 seats. They'll have quite a big voice in the parliament now. The moderates, 14 seats, they'll be ecstatic. This is a slight decrease from last time, but this was a party which just at the start of this year was in absolute meltdown, close to the threshold. There had been a long series of scandals around their MPs, some inexperienced figures who had, various weird scandals around them. Them clocking in at 14 seats and being the kingmakers will make them absolutely thrilled. We've got the Conservatives, a fairly good election result for them, 13 seats. The Red Green Alliance. So this is better than the exit poll, if I remember correctly. 1.2% more votes or percentage points from last time. This is fairly decent. they seem to be a party that exists in a very sort of limited vote share range. They don't have massive swings. They haven't for quite a few cycles now. The Social Liberals are making a quiet comeback after some, poor years for them. And then this is massive. So this is obviously one of the big new developments on here. The Denmark Democrats, 10 seats, going back 4. That is very, very bad for this party. Could part of it be the massive focus that there's been on agriculture? It very well could. Could also be that a lot of the shift towards the Danish People's Party has come at the expense of the Denmark Democrats. They will be very, very disappointed tonight. The alternative at 5 seats, they cleared that threshold. They'll be happy with that. And the Citizens Party at 4 seats, again, they cleared the threshold. This is a brand new party. They'll also be pretty happy with that. Lovely. Shall we hop back over, take a few more questions? And then I think next time we turn to the prognostics, it might actually be fully done for in terms of counting votes. So let's see here. Okay, we've got a... let me just scroll up. I see Luke VB3YL saying Lars will become Prime Minister. I assume he means Lars Løkke Rasmussen, the leader of the moderates. There's not a 0% chance that happens. It could theoretically happen. So stranger things have happened. I botched that line. Whoops. Okay, the Real Nugget Bowl. That is an excellent name. Do you expect LA Liberal Alliance to eventually take the place of Venstre? I don't know. I mean, potentially. It does require that the party keeps growing. Because they can't overtake Venstre at 9-point-something% of the vote. And how much more appeal can they have? Don't know. They've done really, really well with young people. They do very, very well with professionals, people who work quite high up, big earners, that type of audience. Can they translate this to a broader appeal? They need to be creative about the way that they market themselves, about the voter groups that they appeal to. But in theory, yes, yeah. I mean, Venstre might now turn around, get a new leader, reevaluate their positioning, stuff like that, and maybe they'll have a massive comeback. That would be the natural way that the pendulum would swing. But, it is politics. Nothing is natural, especially not in this period that we're currently living through, where they're, all across Europe, you see some of the old traditional parties having died out and being replaced by new ones. So who knows? Excellent question. I saw here, the Cool Casper is government with Social Democrats and the Red-Green Alliance, as it's called in English, Enhedslisten in Danish. Is it likely? As I said, I still think the likeliest outcome is that they work together in a government, but that the Red-Green Alliance is a confidence and supply party, meaning that they don't have internal influence in the government, and that they don't have ministers in the government, and that they can then vote against various pieces of legislation from the government, and the government can find a majority elsewhere if need be. But yeah, I do think it is likely. As I've said, I think the likeliest government is Social Democratic led, moderates, social liberals, and the Green Left in a coalition together with the Red-Green Alliance, the Enhedslisten, as confidence and supply. That's what I think is the likeliest. So, in short, yes. Oh, this is a really interesting one. IDKYS7RT. How likely is it for a party to fracture due to coalition talks? For example, the moderates splitting based on backing red bloc or blue bloc or staying out. I don't think it's super likely, for the sole purpose of you've just got MPs either just elected for the first time or re-elected. they're coming in happy that they've just been elected. I think most of them will follow party line, at least for the time being. Then they'll start getting a little bit more rowdy in the years to come. So I don't think it's super likely, and I definitely don't think it'll happen in the moderates, because the whole idea of the moderates is we can work with anyone, at least most parties towards the center left, center right, and we'll figure out what government we want after the election. All the MPs have known that going in. That's sort of the big mantra around the party. So I don't think that party will split. Someone I could see maybe having some problems here is Venstre. If they decide, no, we're going to fight for a grand coalition, I think there will be people internally in the party who say, hold up, we've just had the worst election, in ages. We can't do this. We need to go back and reevaluate. And that might create an internal division. I think if there is, a big backtrack, for example, from the Green Left saying, okay, maybe we'll look at forming a government with Venstre, there might be a couple of people in that party who go, that's not what we went to, that's not what we stood on during the election. But party leaders know that as well. They are keeping tabs on what their MPs think and what their MPs will do if they do something like that. So I don't think so, but it's an interesting thing to keep an eye out on. Then I saw, let's see here, Professor Kraken, LA represent. I'm not even Danish, LA being Liberal Alliance. Thank you so much for the super chat. That is very kind of you. LA is, the Liberal Alliance is doing fairly well. I think they were expecting better, but they are indeed represented. And then we've got a aha. This is a very interesting super chat. What is a kongelig undersøger? A kongelig undersøger is a Danish word. It directly translates to a kingly researcher, investigator. It's the, I think in English the term is formateur, something like that. Yeah, formateur. Formateur. It's French. This is the person who is given a mandate from the king at some point tomorrow, after all the party leaders have been up speaking to the king and telling the king this is the type of government I'd like to see. Then the king appoints a kongelig undersøger, someone who essentially, the ball's in their court. They can go out and try to form a majority in parliament. They'll get a chance to see if they can form a majority. If they can, amazing. That's a government. It, gets voted through in parliament and, yada, yada, yada. That is the government. If they fail, it's all the party leaders back to the king. They now say, oh, okay, now we're looking at maybe, let's point at that person. And then the king can appoint a new kongelig undersøger. There's been a lot of talk in the last couple of days about all kinds of fun games that the various parties can play to try to make themselves more interesting during negotiations. What if the Red-Green Alliance doesn't point to Mette Frederiksen? What if they instead point to Pia Olsen Dyhr, who is the leader of the Green Left? Then all of a sudden, maybe there's not a majority for Mette Frederiksen to be the first kongelig undersøger. Then maybe the ball gets passed to someone in Blue Bloc, or maybe to Lars Løkke Rasmussen, the moderate. There's also a little bit of talk about the Speaker of Parliament, Søren Gade, who is a member of Venstre, being granted the title by all of the Blue Bloc parties pointing to him, and there being some internal friction in the Red Bloc, and him then being able to go out to see if he can form something. At the end of the day, even if the kongerunde, as they're called, essentially the rounds of attempting to form government, turns into a bit of a chaos of teasing and political games, I think at the end of the day, it won't have a massive impact on who gets to be prime minister. I still think it's almost certainly Mette Frederiksen. Maybe in a crazy scenario, it could be Lars Løkke Rasmussen, the leader of the moderates. But what playing games with this process could end up doing is make some parties more influential in agreeing to the policy of a future government. Really good question. Thank you for asking it. Let's see here. And then the same person, Code Brew. Good videos. Your documentary style piece was great. Thank you so much. This is going to be interesting. What's the difference between Denmark Democrats and Dansk Folkeparti, or the Danish People's Party? I've touched on this before, but it is a really good question because they're both sort of right-wing national conservative parties. They originate from different histories. The Danish People's Party was founded in 1995 out of the ruins of the old Progress Party, which was initially actually an anti-tax party, but later became a anti-immigrant party. And then the Denmark Democrats was founded by Inger Støjberg, a former deputy leader for Venstre and a minister for that party, who left that party ahead of a trial where she was found guilty and sentenced to jail, which she served in home arrest for her breach of the rules as Minister for Immigration. That's a long-winded way of saying that they've, got different histories. The Danish People's Party is aside from just being a party very critical of immigration, it is also very much a pensioners' party and a working-class party. They're borderline. I wouldn't even say borderline. They are center-left economically. I think they're quite close to the Social Democrats on a lot of economic policies. Whereas the Denmark Democrats are more of an agrarian interest party. They appeal a lot to rural areas of the country and a lot to farmers. So they've got that sort of slightly different prioritization there. Then there's also the fact that I'd say that the Danish People's Party is more right-wing on immigration policy than the Denmark Democrats. The Danish People's Party favor remigration, something that the Denmark Democrats have not taken upon themselves to do. So yeah, I think those are the sort of broad stroke differences between those two parties. Let us see. I'm going to do one more quick scroll, and then we're going to pop back over to the results. Last time I just looked at DR. Now I'll look at TV2. IDKYS7RT. How long do coalitions usually last? Is it very rare for them to collapse midterm, or is it a distinct possibility? With the potential of 4+ party coalitions, are they more prone to collapse midterm? I'll answer the second part of your question first. With the potential of 4 parties or even more in a coalition, are they more prone to collapse midterm? 100%. The more parties you have, the more different views you have, the more different personalities you have that will clash with each other, the more likely one of them goes, hey, I don't want to be a part of this project anymore. So yes to that. And that's also why when you have these government negotiations, usually you want as few parties in government as possible. It's just easier. And if you can form a majority with less parties than a different situation, it's normally that one with less parties that you're going to want to go for. How long do they last? And is it very rare for them to collapse midterm? It's very rare for them to collapse midterm, yes. It definitely has happened many a times. I don't believe in the 21st century at any point. But that's collapsing formally. In a lot of cases, you will see a prime minister calling an early election, if not a super early election, then a slightly early election, because they can see the writing on the wall that this partnership is no longer feasible. 4 years is the sort of standard Danish electoral period. At about the 3.5 year, maybe even 3 year mark, parties start thinking, okay, we're going into election soon. And that's where the frictions really become clear. And we saw this with the current constellation. The first couple of months of the year were, abound with different, now Venstre wants to do this thing out with the government. And the moderates have this idea that they know there isn't support for in the government. The Social Democrats have a bunch of ideas. And once that starts happening, you know that it's about time for this project to end. And that's why it's quite common for electoral periods to only last about 3.5 years. Because, all the parties are starting to look elsewhere. It's just sort of sensible and natural. Lovely. Let's have another look. Wow. Kalle Kalize. Don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but I love the name. Jonas, do you have any faith in an ABCMV coalition? So A, Social Democrats, B, Social Liberals, Conservatives, Moderates, Venstre. So I've talked a bit about this throughout the night, and I've seen a lot of commentators on social media and in the mainstream media talking about this as a potential. I've been saying no. The more people are talking about this, the more I'm thinking maybe there's been, party leaders are out whispering in the ears of commentators saying this is what we're hoping for, but I still really, really struggle to see it. It's 5 parties. That's a lot of parties in a coalition. It is... Venstre have said they wouldn't work with the Social Liberals. They probably still could. But having 5 parties in a coalition together is a lot, and none of these parties would want to be in a coalition where they... or would want to be confidence and supply to a coalition party of the other, or a coalition constellation of the other ones. So I struggle to see that. And I also think the Social Democrats would see this as simply just too right-wing for them. They'd rather work with maybe the Green Left. Oh, someone's saying I missed a super chat. That's not good. Let me go back and double check. I might have covered it since that message was sent. If I haven't, could someone do one of those tag things where they just let me know what it was, and then I'll 100% get to it. Apologies if I did miss that. Let's see here. Okay. I'm not seeing anything right now. There will be great questions. Someone asking how I'm doing. I'm doing great. Love election night. I can barely speak anymore, but yeah, doing good. Might take another break in 15 minutes and then come back on for the last little stint. We're getting close to midnight and the result is practically already there, but I'll take a few more questions until the exciting conversation dies down. I have covered it. Thank you, Phil. Appreciate the help on that one. Oh, just got one last. Okay, we'll cover this. Thank you, Code Brew. And then... just saying that I'm being gaslit. There are no super chats missed. Thank you, Code Brew. Thank you, people. You guys are very helpful. I don't have any moderators to help on the chat, so I really appreciate you guys keeping me straight. Metis LX has a pretty good point. Since it's first time in 100 years, no single party has more than 40 seats, do you not think it implies that there will be at least 4 in coalition, if not 5? I do think there will be 4. I think Social Democrats, Moderates, Social Liberals, and the Green Left. 5, I really still struggle to see it, but you've got a point there. I mean, the more splintered the system is, the more you need to sit and negotiate with party after party after party to try to cobble together some form of majority. So who knows? I mean, if there is ever a time for there to be 5 parties in a coalition, yeah, this would be the most likely election. And that gets me to a point, actually. 12 parties seemingly elected to parliament tonight. That's the most ever parties elected in a single election in Danish history. That's crazy. It's not the most parties that have ever stood in an election. I believe that was last cycle when we had 13 parties standing. This time we've had 12 parties standing, but they've all been elected. So it will be the most fractured parliament we've ever seen. Are we at Dutch standards yet? Not quite. We might be getting close. No offense if there are Dutch people watching. But yeah, cool. Let's have a look at TV2 now. Oh, something interesting is happening. Oh no, never mind. I will share my screen again. So, I said something interesting was happening, and then I said, no, it isn't. What I thought was that the TV2 and DR still had different prognostics. They don't. They've now come to what seems to be an agreement, which is 84 seats for Red Bloc, 77 seats for Blue Bloc, and 14 seats for the moderates. This seems to be, we're at 99% of the votes counted. I'd be surprised if this isn't the result. And the fun thing here is that at the start of the night, at 8 p.m., we got exit polls. This is incredibly close to the exit poll. It might actually be spot on that we got from DR. Then we get some prognostics, especially from DR, that suggest, nope, Blue Bloc got more seats than Red Bloc, which had me, doubting everything I thought I knew about the way that this election had sort of turned out and the way that it had been shaping up for the past 3.5 weeks. Now we're getting back pretty close to, I think, what a lot of people expected, at least in terms of the way that the seats have been split in blocks. 84, 77, 14. Again, I reiterate, really good result for the moderates. They'll be very, very pleased at moderates HQ. All right, these are the party breakdowns. Yep, I mean, the story the next couple of days will be mostly about, hey-ho, what's a government going to look like? But there will also be a story in the Social Democrats about, goodness us, we had a terrible night. What's going to happen now? There will be a story in Venstre about them having a bad night. Danish People's Party will be thrilled. This was very, very good for the Danish People's Party. The Conservatives will be quite pleased. And I think the story I'm not seeing a lot of people talking about, I'm obviously on here as well, so I'm not following the debate that closely, but the Denmark Democrats. This is a very, very poor election for the Denmark Democrats, especially when you consider that this is an election that was fought on agriculture. Now, of course, a lot of voters will be quite skeptical and critical of the Danish agriculture industry because of the pesticides, because of the pork industry, for example, but also because the Danish agriculture sector, emits a lot of CO2. And that's been a big debate point in the last couple of years, and also because Danish agriculture takes up a lot of land. Denmark is one of the countries in the world with the least amount of natural wildlife and forests and stuff like that. So, all of this, of course, a lot of people will be frustrated with agriculture. But Inger Støjberg, the leader of the Denmark Democrats and the party at large, does still represent a good chunk of Danish voters who are people who live in rural areas, people who either work on, own, or somehow, are economically benefit from agriculture. So the fact that her and her party haven't gotten more support in this result is shocking to me. I'd be really interested if there are any takes in the comments. Anyone out there who had kind of seen this coming from the Denmark Democrats. I definitely hadn't. Let me see if there are any other big narratives here. Again, Citizens Party and Alternative, these two parties that were close to the threshold, they make it in. They'll be pleased. And then, let's see. The Social Liberals, the Red Green Alliance, and the Conservatives, they will be quite pleased. I think they were expecting to get little, positive shifts in their way, but, you never know. That's the type of stuff that could, go up and down on election day, and I think they'll be pleased with these results. And with that, let me take, let's say, a couple more questions, and then I'm going to hop on, do a wee break, and then once I come back, we'll run the last couple of questions, check in on if the final result is through, and then I think we'll call it a night. But first, a couple more questions. I saw one. This is ages ago, and I'm so sorry I'm not crediting the person who asked it. Who do I think are the likeliest leaders for Venstre and for the Social Democrats when at some point Troels Lund Poulsen, the leader of Venstre, and Mette Frederiksen, the leader of the Social Democrats, resign? Venstre, I think, is quite easy. They've got an heir apparent. It is a woman called Stephanie Lose. She is the current economy minister. She's the current deputy leader of the party, and she's a very, very prominent figure in the south of Jutland, where she used to be regionsrådsformand. Essentially, what would you call that? The chair or the mayor or the leader of the region of South Jutland. So she's, I think, absolutely the favorite to be the next leader of Venstre. For the Social Democrats, I think it's between about 2.5 candidates. The front runner is the current finance minister, Nicolai Wammen. His closest competition is a guy called Peter Hummelgaard, who is the current justice minister. And then the sort of dark horse, the potential surprise, is the current schools minister, Mathias Tesfaye. Nikolai Vammen and Peter Hummelgaard both come with these very hefty, very weighty portfolios, whereas Mathias Tesfaye has been a massive ideological thinker in terms of the social democratic project over the past 5+ years. And he's someone who appeals to a lot of voters because of the way he communicates. I've noticed whenever he gives interviews, he speaks really, really slowly. That means he speaks with more gravity, but it also, makes it a lot easier for your layman person who might not be a hardcore politics follower to support him. I'm talking about him more than any of the other candidates, and he's the least likely. I'm just pointing out that I think there's someone people aren't talking about enough. All right, we've got 2 more things here. Jason Curling, 2887. Thanks for the info. I wish we had multiple parties in the US. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to follow sometimes when you've got this many parties, but it also makes, I think, politics more interesting, and it makes it way more representative. I personally really like that there are a lot of parties. It can be an absolute jumble. 12 parties is maybe a little bit much, but, I'd rather that than only 2. And then we've got Code Brew again with a super chat. Code Brew, you are brilliant. As someone unfamiliar with the nitty-gritty of this, does Boanis Petit, the Citizens Party, effectively cannibalize voters from larger right-of-centre parties with their unimpressive mandates that won't change much? Partially. I think some of the Citizens Party's voters come from other blue bloc parties. Maybe some from the Danish People's Party, maybe some from the Denmark Democrats, maybe some from Liberal Alliance because of a sort of overarching, view on libertarian ideas. I also think they're taking a lot of voters who wouldn't normally go out to vote. This is a party that doesn't exist physically very much in most parts of the country. As I've walked about the city where I live in, Aarhus, there have been election posters for every single party, but only a couple very select few for the Citizens Party. I don't think that they've got like a big infrastructure or anything. You don't see them out and about on the street handing out flyers and stuff, but they exist online. And I think the sort of communities that they exist in online are people who'd be quite skeptical of mainstream politics and probably wouldn't go out to vote because they don't feel that they're represented by it. I think their success, the fact that they've now got 2.1% of people out to vote for them, could also speak into why this election seems to have a very, very strong voter turnout. So I think it's cannibalizing a little bit, but I also think it's these people who are unlikely to vote generally. And I also think there's a good chance that there's a good chunk of young people who have never voted before for any party, seeing the Citizens Party and feeling somewhat connected to that party and going out to vote for them. Really interesting question. And I think the Citizens Party is going to be one of those. It's not interesting to follow parliamentarily anymore. I don't think they're in a position where they can decide a government or anything. But I think they'll be interesting to follow as they sort of come into their own in Parliament. What are the big ideas that they're going to talk about? During the campaign, whenever Last Boy Matisse and their leader has been on TV, it's been, all over the place. That's not a criticism, but it just suggests to me that this is a party with a lot of ideas and with, relatively little screen time. So I think we'll learn a lot more about what makes the party tick over the next couple of years. They've tried to talk about AI. They sometimes talk about the World Economic Forum. But they've also, on the welfare debate, positioned themselves in some interesting places where I can't quite place them on the spectrum. Talking about more public services quite close to communities, almost taking like a Denmark Democrat idea of focus on rural and small communities. But they're also, libertarian and argue for, massive cuts to the bureaucracy. So fascinating party to follow. I'll leave it at that. All right. I will take a break at midnight, so let me find one last question. Can you vote if you live in another country? From Gian Mario D'Antonio 8786. I might have butchered that name. It's hard to see when there aren't spaces. Yes, you can sometimes. So the rules, without having them in front of me, are something like if you're Danish and you work abroad for a limited amount of time, or if you live abroad to study, or if you live abroad for a Danish company, I think, then for a certain amount of years after you've moved out of Denmark, yes, you can vote. Then you can go to your local embassy or consulate and you can vote there. I lived in Glasgow from 2019 to 2025. No, 2024. And I was a student at that time, and so I could go and vote I could go and vote in the 2022 election, which I did. I went to the consulate in Edinburgh. So yes, you can, but it is very limited. And if you've moved from Denmark to somewhere else, even if you're a Danish citizen, if you've moved there for a longer period of time, no, you can't vote. So it's fairly strict, but there are some situations where you can. I see Code Brew adding that that they cannot vote, so they'll have lived there long enough not to qualify, or they'll not work in for a Danish company or some of the other situations where you would qualify. So there are a lot of Danes who can't vote outside of Denmark. Galen Moyo. Jonas, are you Danish? Yes, I am. I am Danish. But I've lived abroad quite a lot, which is why I also started making YouTube videos in English. And then all of a sudden now my niche is being the guy in Denmark who makes politics content on Danish politics in English. Boom. Okay, let's take one quick last one and then I'll take a break. Oscar Ekelund, 3907. Jonas, was AI a political discussion in the Danish election this year? The short answer is no, it was not. At least not very much. You had it brought up in one debate. A debate run by TV2, where you had half of the party leaders together, and a member of the audience asked a question about AI. And it was quite clear that this was not something that the party leaders had thought very much about, had given very much thought. And the one person who really came out swinging with a lot of views on AI, being quite AI pessimistic, at least about how it's going to impact work, was Lars Boje Mathiesen of the Citizens Party. So I think this is something that party will want to engage with quite a lot now that they're elected to parliament. But generally speaking, no, it wasn't a very big part of the debate this year, which I think is a bit unfortunate, actually, because it is, such a sweeping, important development that we're seeing. But no, this debate was much more about, not even about the climate, but about like local environment. And then, a couple of other add-ons, for example, remigration or wealth tax, or the size of school classes, for example. But no, I didn't feel very much. All right. I am going to take a 13-minute break. I will be back at 15 minutes past midnight CET, 00:15. And then we will go through what I imagine at that point will pretty much be the final results. And then we'll also turn to Greenland and the Faroe Islands for a bit. Alrighty. Thank you. I'll see you guys shortly. Goodbye. That should be the volume there. And that is us back. The results are 100% in now, and we know how the next parliament is going to look. I also just there, while I was taking a quick break, having a little bit of coffee and some water and a little bit to eat, was having a look at the speech that Truls Poulsen, the leader of Venstre, gave just there. So there's a lot of interesting stuff to talk about. Let's start with having a look at these final results. So I am just going to share my screen once again. We're going to use DR as our source here, because at this point, all of the news sites are reporting on the exact same result, because it is 100% in. We've got everything. So there we go. Boom, 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 boom. I'll make space for myself so you guys can follow me too. Cool. This is it. 38 seats for the Social Democrats, 20 for the Green Left, 18 for Venstre, 16 for Liberal Alliance, 16 for the Danish People's Party, 14 for the Moderates, 13 for the Conservatives, 11 for the Red Green Alliance, 10 for the Social Liberals, 10 for the Denmark Democrats, and 5 for Alternative, and 4 for the Citizens Party. That means we've got, here we go, 84 seats in Red Bloc, 77 in Blue Bloc, and the Moderates in the middle as kingmakers. This is the result, the final result. This means that there's no majority in either of the blocks, and that at the end of the day, it is the moderates who can swing this thing one way or the other. As I said, I was just watching the speech there by Truls Poulsen, the leader of Venstre, the center-right liberal conservative party, and he ruled out a coalition with the Social Democrats. He said he either wants what he calls a right-wing plus, moderates government, or to be in opposition, which I think sort of speaks to something I've been expecting quite a bit throughout the night, is that you won't have another government with the Social Democrats and with Venstre. So where does that leave us? As I've said a couple of times, I think that leaves us in a position where the moderates are quite likely to form a coalition of some sorts with the left bloc, the red bloc. But, you never know. Things can happen. The Conservatives could somehow get involved. I don't see why they would want to do that. I think they'd be happy as an opposition party now that they've sort of managed to get out of internal crisis and are now looking at, a bit more influence than before. So that's where we are now. Let's quickly talk about the Faroe Islands and Greenland, because as I've mentioned on this stream a couple of times, the Faroe Islands elect 2 members of parliament and Greenland does the same. We've got the results from the Faroe Islands. They have elected 1 left of center MP, and they've elected 1 right of center MP. The left of center MP is Shuda Skole, the current MP for the Social Democratic Sister Party in the Faroe Islands, and the center-right MP that they've elected is, and I'm forgetting her name, but the party that she represents is Venstres sister party, a sort of liberal conservative party. So that, on here, you can add 1 seat to each block, even though this is a complicated little side piece, but the Faroe Islands often have talked about quite a lot recently that they don't really think that they should get involved with these government formations that much anymore. So, even if it could swing it, I don't know if they'd want to. Then we've got Greenland. Greenland are still counting. So we don't quite know what's happening in Greenland. I think the likeliest scenario is that we get 1 right of center MP for the party Demokratit, which is actually Liberal Alliance's sister party, so it's a liberal party, and then the left of center Inuit Ataqatigiit party, which is the sister party to the Green Left. So that's what seems to be the lay of the land. We still don't know about Greenland. They've just started counting their votes, so that one's still a bit. Weeping Scorpion. Anna Falkenberg, that is correct. That is the name of the MP in the Faroe Islands. But yep, that seems to be the lay of the land. This is the result. This is the final outcome. I'm still standing by my guess and analysis that the likeliest situation is that Mette Frederiksen continues as Prime Minister, the Social Democrats continue to lead a government, and that they'll form a coalition government with the moderates, with the Green Left, and with the Social Liberals, with the Red Green Alliance as their confidence and supply party. But just because it looks a little bit easy when I say it like that, doesn't mean it is. It is. I think we're gearing up to a couple of quite frantic weeks of coalition negotiations, because even though we have a situation where, there's a majority that kind of makes sense, I think a lot of people will want to influence the government in various ways. They'll want to influence the types of policies that the government gets through, and I think that will lead to some interesting election gameplay the next couple of weeks in terms of who gets to be the formateur, or the kongelig undersøger, something I've spoken about not too long ago. So yeah, interesting stuff. We won't know anything for at least days, probably weeks, maybe months. That seems to be the big outcome here. Cheesy peasy snake, why do you think it's IA, the Greenlandic party Inuit Ataqatigiit, which is a sister party to the Green Left, and not Nelarak? Nelarak is a Greenlandic sister party. No, it doesn't have a sister party in Denmark. It is a Greenlandic, very pro-independence party. That's a good question. I think Nelarak is the other contender. Why I say I think it's IA is because I think, and I don't live in Greenland, I don't know what the feeling is there, but I do think that Nalarak has been a bit confusing in its messaging for a while. I think a lot of figures in Nalarak have become quite controversial due to this whole Greenland crisis. Some figures from Nalarak being semi-Trump friendly, and I'd imagine that that's worn down quite a bit. And then IA is the sort of the next likeliest or the next biggest party currently. But hey, it could also be Nalarak. And Nalarak doesn't belong to either of the blocks. They would position themselves in the middle ideologically, but they would make the whole point of that seat to be about wanting Greenlandic independence. All right, let us turn to a couple of questions. There we go. That's me big again. Let's see. Husen5033. Why doesn't Denmark have a centre party like the other Nordic parties and the Liberals as the former party? Why don't they? That's a good question. So they used to. Venstre used to be a party sort of somewhat comfortably in the ideological middle for a time being, with the Conservatives to the right and the Social Democrats to the left. You then had a split up of Venstre. It became Venstre and then Radikale Venstre, or the Social Liberals. And even then, for a period, Venstre was still kind of a centre party. They wouldn't work with the Social Democrats, but, they were more centre-focused than they are now. And so I think the crux of your question is, why isn't the Farmers' Party a centre party? I think it's just history. But, that could be a PhD thesis, to be honest, why exactly that's developed that way. So I can't give you a clear answer on that, but it's an excellent question and something worth studying. Boris, IMO, Boris, in my opinion, maybe, 90. Do you think Faroe Islands will get independence? Not anytime soon. I think there's a general trend, though, both in the Faroe Islands and Greenland. Maybe not towards full independence, but there is a trend towards more autonomy and more responsibility given to the local governments there. I shouldn't call them local governments, to the self-governments there. So I could see them becoming more and more independent. They've both been shifting this way, both the Faroe Islands and Greenland. And the Faroe Islands already have quite a lot of responsibilities, and almost all the parties want some degree of independence at this point. So yeah, I think they'll get independence, but not full independence. I don't think they'd want full 100%, cut off all ties to Denmark type independence. But maybe a model that's quite close to that. Let's see. Ooh, got another super chat from Code Brew. You are absolutely on fire. Really appreciate it. The FO had this leader of a party who wanted to sunset the islands mandate in Danish politics. Aha. How would this work? FO is not Iceland. No geothermal, etc. They can't realistically be self-sufficient. Let me just... So, do feel free to send a comment. The way I understand this, the FO... That could be several things. So there has been conversation. This much I know. Do leave a little comment if I'm not answering your question correctly. There has been talk, especially in the Faroe Islands, about getting rid of these mandates, these 2 seats that the Faroe Islands have in the Danish parliament. This has been something that some people in the Faroe Islands have been talking about in longer periods of time, because firstly, they don't want to impact Danish politics because they want more independence for themselves, so they don't see why they should have a vote on a bunch of internal Danish matters, but also because it, it adds some degree more of independence. And then in terms of self-sufficiency, I assume this is still on the Faroe Islands. No, I mean, and that's sort of what I'm thinking. They need some form of cooperation with Denmark. They wouldn't be fully independent. We're talking an island of 55,000 people or so. It's very, very hard to, do politics, to do geopolitics and foreign relations and defense and all of these things, and energy policy, which I think you're getting in on there as well. Yeah, let me know if I misunderstood that question. Oh, just got another comment from you there. Faroe Islands. Self-reliance would be impossible for them. I don't understand how running on having no mandates in Danish politics would be any gain. And yeah, the self-reliance part, that's surely. Cool. Yeah, so I understood that correctly. No, I mean, it is an interesting thing to run on wanting to be less represented, but I think it speaks to a grander narrative of wanting to, we're not going to get involved in Danish politics, so we want you guys to kind of hold off a bit on Faroese politics and internal matters. And yeah, I think we agree that fully being self-reliant would be an impossibility. They'd need some form of international cooperation. Cool. International cooperation with Denmark, that is. Okay. Let's see. Do we have any other interesting questions? Mia Natalie 2443. Do you think Enhedslisten, the Red-Green Alliance, will back a government with the moderates? Yes, I do, because the party's leader has been out suggesting as much himself, essentially that the party could be open to potentially working with the moderates. The moderates have shut this down. They have said that they don't want to be a part of a government relying on votes from the Red-Green Alliance. So that's a one-sided... The Red-Green Alliance realizes that, if we want a mostly red government, we need to work with the moderates, and the moderates hoping that they can keep a bunch of different coalition constellations up in the air and as potentials. So yes, I do think the Red-Green Alliance would be open to that. Obviously, depending on the policy as well. Assuming it's red enough and green enough. Joachim 1684. Hi, Julius. What will this election mean for immigration policy in the future? I don't think anything specifically concretely now. The Social Democrats are almost certainly going to be involved in the next government, almost certainly going to lead it. they know where they stand on this issue. They're not going to change. Even if we've got more left-wing parties, these left-wing parties in coalition will still probably be okay in a government that's as strict as the Danish government is currently. But I think the one interesting thing that this election could do to immigration in Denmark is, I've talked about it before, this introduction of remigration from the Danish People's Party into the Danish political conversation. And I think this is something that might grow legs and continue to evolve in the Danish discourse. So I think that's the big thing from this election to take away. Cheesy Peasy Snake. Do you still think Lars, that being Lars Løkke Rasmussen, the leader of the moderates, can support a centre-blue government as Troels, that being Troels Lund Poulsen, the leader of Venstre, suggests? No, I don't. So Troels Lund Poulsen was out in his speech. He said he more or less wouldn't, work with the Social Democrats, and he said he either wants this sort of right-wing plus moderates government or to be in opposition. I can't see the moderates working with the blue bloc as it is right now. The moderates and the Danish People's Party getting together and forming some form of an agreement just seems too far-fetched to me. I don't think that's feasible at this rate. That being said, I could imagine Lars Løkke Rasmussen will want to kind of keep the idea alive to give himself better, to give himself more power in negotiations. But I could never see it actually creating a government. I really couldn't. And the Danish People's Party have been out effectively saying, well, not effectively, directly saying that they wouldn't support any government with Lars Løkke Rasmussen as a minister. Lars Løkke Rasmussen wouldn't want to be in a government where he's not a minister. So no, I really, really struggle to see that. But he might keep the idea alive just to, better position himself. Charlie Evans, 3032. Do you think Troels Lund, that being Troels Lund Poulsen, the leader of Venstre, and Inger Støjberg, the leader of the Denmark Democrats, will resign due to their parties' performances? Troels Lund Poulsen, I think, will probably not last that long anymore. I think he'll see through, he didn't resign in his speech just there, and I think he'll see through the coalition negotiations over the next couple of weeks. He won't work with the Social Democrats, but I think he'll try to keep alive this idea of a blue government with the moderates. Once that almost certainly doesn't come to pass, I reckon he will resign. I'm not 100% certain, but terrible election. Personally, I don't think, from seeing him over the campaign, I don't think he really wants this. He was he ended up as leader because he was the best choice when the former leader resigned due to stress. I don't think he's ever really seen himself as, a potential leader, and now that he is leader, I don't think that he's loving it. So I could see him resigning. Inger Støjberg from the Denmark Democrats, absolutely not. She is the founder of the party. She has been its leader since it was founded, and she is its identity. She is the party. Yes, it's got other, figures. Yes, some of them are quite talented and have profiled themselves quite well over the last parliament. But it is her party. She couldn't be forced out. I really don't see that happening. The only reason I'd imagine her resigning is if she's decided, I'm done with politics. I'm going to go do something else with my life. But she is a political creature like very few others, so I actually don't see that happening either. I think she'll be party leader for a while ahead. Ketchup Blood 94. Blue coalition equals Meta resigns. Red coalition means Troels Lund Poulsen resigns. Yeah, I think that's really, really likely. We've got Code Brew asking, is remigrating literally confiscating passports already issued followed by deportation? Isn't that in violation of the Constitution, or is there a viable path to do so? And if so, how? Not exactly. So, again, remigration is a very broad term. It can mean a bunch of different things. And I'm not 100% certain on what it means for the Danish People's Party. And there's been a lot of debate about other parties trying to present the Danish People's Party's policies and the Danish People's Party coming out saying that's inaccurate. Broad strokes, at the first stint, the Danish People's Party are not talking about taking people's passports and then deporting them. The first stint, it is a matter of people who live in Denmark, albeit legally, but who, for whatever, the indexes that they set, you don't speak the language, you're not well integrated, you don't have a job, you're welfare dependent, various factors that they've talked about. They argue that you're then not, a good person to have in Denmark. You don't fit with the culture. You've not, done the work necessary for you to integrate. So then you should be sent out of the country. That's their argument. On top of waiting, citizenships that have been granted to immigrants over the past 20 years. Are these people Danish enough? Do they fit certain integration measures? And if not, then they've talked about removing that citizenship. I think technically you could do that if someone has double citizenship. If they have single citizenship, no. But I mean, this would require a strong majority in parliament. It would require other parties getting behind it, and I don't see that happening. So I don't see it being likely. I don't see a viable path, at least in the near future, for anything like this. But I think it's something that the Danish People's Party have had a lot of success campaigning on. Really good question. Thank you. The Danish Guy 101. Don't you think a large reason for the Social Democrats' downfall is Mette Frederiksen? I think a lot of people are tired of her. I think you are right. I think there are a couple of things that have led to this. I think there's a personal factor around Mette Frederiksen. She's been prime minister for about 7 years now. In her first period, she had a good handful of pretty serious scandals around her handling of COVID, as well as some internal drama between her civil servants and some of our sort of FBI-like organizations. It's a very complicated story. But yeah, there were some big internal dramas and scandals. I think she lost a lot of personal support there. She still had a very good election afterwards. But I think that sort of stayed in the back of a lot of people's minds. Add on top of that, the fact that she's been, leader of this very unpopular government. It's unpopular with the center-left. Why would they be in a government with the center-right? A lot of their voters don't like that. The center-right has been similarly unpopular there. Why are they in government with the center-left? That's also been a factor. And then the final factor is this shift to the sort of the liberal side on economic policies, I think has really dragged down her and her party's favorability. A lot of traditional, left-wing voters, center-left voters just don't see themselves in the economic project that she's run on. So during this campaign, she's tried to move herself economically leftwards, but I don't think a lot of people have bought that. I think a lot of people have instead turned to a party like the Green Left and gone, you know what, that's where I'm going to put my vote instead. Good question. Oh, I'm getting a couple of people saying that there's no sound. Let me see. Can you guys hear me now? Sound is fine. Okay. So I'm getting some different reports on sound. Okay. Do let me know if that continues to be a problem for people. My sound is just fine. Okay, cool. Thank you, guys. Sound's working. Okay, great. Was the sound working the whole time? I'll just... Sound bugged for a bit, working now. Okay, cool. Thank you, everyone. Lovely. And people are saying for the whole time, or some people are saying a small hitch. Amazing, cool. So I assume you guys got the most of those answers. David, this is, it's really hard to read those usernames. What you obviously can't have spaces in usernames. So David Chioroanu, David Cioroianu 1092. Hi, are the final results in? Yes, they are. Go check them out on dr.dk. I think that's the best place for you to find them. They are in. I believe it is 84 seats for the red bloc, 77 for the blue bloc, and 14 for the moderates. Yes, they are. Contour 7. Is there any sort of fear of Russian interference within the Danish elections as it has been in other European nations? There were fears. There were indeed fears with especially the Danish version of the FBI, PAT, as it's known, coming out right as the election was called. They released a bit of a paper on this, arguing that there are fears of interference in this election. It doesn't seem like there's been much. I mean, there's been no reporting on Russian interference during this election. That's not to say that there hasn't been any, and I imagine this is something people are looking into and will learn more about in the next couple of weeks and months. But no, it doesn't seem that there has been, but there were fears, and I assume that the Danish authorities have been keeping a very close eye on this. Got another chat from Code Brew. Looking forward to the future on this channel. Insanely helpful for staying up to date abroad with sober, level-headed takes. Thank you. Nope, thank you. Really appreciate you guys watching. Love being able to do stuff like this. I love politics, love following it, love it, discussing it, and really appreciate you guys joining me for this live stream. So thank you. Santiano Lanuzzi. Sorry if that's wrong. The most realistic scenario is SF, the Green Left, A being the Social Democrats, B being the Social Liberals, and the Moderates, with the Red-Green Alliance support. Right, yes, I would agree. I would agree with that. I think that's the likeliest scenario. First, Canite. Is the Moderates showing as a separate bloc just convention decided by the media outlets, or is that on request from the Moderates? Good question. I mean, a bit of both. So the Moderates is a fairly new party. It was only founded in 2022, and this is the second election that they're standing in. And they do place themselves there in the middle. They are a party. They can work with the red bloc or the blue bloc. So it just makes sense to put them in the middle. So that's a decision that news stations have taken quite clearly, because, you know, putting them in red bloc or blue bloc would just be inaccurate, because they could work with either bloc. Ideally, they'd want, you know, to grab the center right and the center left and work over the middle. I imagine if they'd been placed in one of the blocks, they would also have said, hey ho, that's wrong, please fix that. So, a bit of both. Great question. Youngwall99. Did you have a prediction for the election before tonight's result? In that case, how much does it deviate from the night's actual result? I did have a prediction. I thought it would, red bloc would have more seats than blue bloc, and I thought that the Moderates would effectively be the decider. I made a bit of a polling aggregate that I posted on a video on my YouTube channel. It's all fairly close to this result. And I think that's not me being some, you know, soothsayer being able to predict the future. That is purely just the fact that polling has been quite consistent throughout this election in terms of how many seats red bloc gets, how many seats blue bloc gets, and what position the Moderates will have. So polling has been quite consistent. That led me to having a pretty close prediction to the outcome. That's not credit to me. Haha. This is an interesting point. BH Mand, 1669. Votes have been counted, yes, for the parties. Votes for individual... I'll try that again. Votes for individual members will take another 1 to 2 days. Yes, that is correct. Something that's interesting, an interesting part of the Danish electoral system, is the fact that it's an open list system. So when you go down to vote, you can either just vote for a party, or you can vote for a specific candidate within that party. The amount of personal votes that a candidate gets determines which of the candidates from a party gets elected. So let's say in a specific constituency, the Social Democrats get 2 seats. Which 2 seats depends on essentially who gets the most votes on that list. And we won't know that for a couple of days, but it's really interesting and really important, especially when you start talking about sort of characters in politics. So that could be, for example, you know, who could replace Mette Frederiksen when she one day resigns? It could be which party leaders are particularly popular and which party leaders are not quite as popular as they maybe should be. But it also determines, I mean, who gets into parliament. Because the Social Democrats and Venstre, two very big parties who currently have ministers in the government and have a lot of big profiles, because they've done so poorly, expect a lot of pretty big names in Danish politics to not re-win their seats. So that'll be really, really interesting to follow in the days to come. Ooh, I'm getting an update here from Ketchup Blood. Greenland, 7 out of 73 towns counted. Nalarak in lead, Atasut in second. So that would be a very, very interesting result. Again, 7 out of 73, we're talking less than 10%, but Nalarak being a very, very hardline pro-independence party who doesn't really fit with the Danish bloc system, and Atasut being a very small party, a historically significant one, but currently a very small one, a centre-right party, currently the sister party to Venstre, and I believe they only have 2 seats in the Greenlandic parliament. If they do get elected, that would be massive. I doubt it, but, it could be interesting. One thing I've noticed is one of their candidates, Ole, I forget his surname. First name Ole, he's very big on Twitter. He's essentially one of the leading voices on the Greenlandic debate on Twitter about, Greenland not becoming part of the US. So maybe he's pulling votes for Atasut if they do end up doing way better than expected. But, I still think that Demokratiet, the current government leading party, will get a seat. Really interesting. Elle 8689. Will this result possibly lead to new elections? Or do they want to avoid it enough to get a government with anyone? Yes. Oh, Ketchup Blood just saying Atasut is a pro-union. I hope I didn't say it was pro-independence. It is very much pro-union. It is the most pro-union party in Greenland. Will this result possibly lead to new elections, or do they want to avoid it enough to get a government with anyone? I really struggle to see this leading to a new election. I think Danish politicians are ready to play games with government negotiations, but they're not ready to play enough games that it would lead to a new election. Purely just because it would be seen as unserious when you've got war raging in Europe, you've got the US threatening to take Greenland, all this kind of stuff. I really doubt that would happen. I think a government will be formed. Prank 9273. I don't know if your question is a prank, but I will answer it seriously. Who won the election? I'm just catching up. The election result, and I'm gonna do this again. We're just gonna hop over here. The election result sees red bloc with 84, blue bloc with 77, and the moderates in the middle with 14 seats. This would mean that there's no clear, next government, and that the government negotiations will be very, very interesting in the weeks and months to come. So that's the quick of it. Code Brew saying, I think Lars Løkke might die if they call a new election. I think this is in reference to the fact that he's clearly not been well this whole election period. I think he's been suffering from a virus or a viral infection. He's barely had a voice during most of the debates. I think he wouldn't appreciate it if a new election were formed. And at the end of the day, though, it is him who decides if there's going to be a new election. He is the kingmaker. He can force a new election if need be, but he can probably also make a coalition come about. All right. Let us see. I'm going to scroll up a bit, see if there's a gold nugget further up. I didn't see anything. Monskov. Weeks and months. Could it take that long to form a government? Yes, it could. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the last government negotiation took between 3 and 4 weeks, which is quite long by Danish standards, but that was a confusing result. I think this is an even more confusing result, so yes, I think it could. Very much so. Charlie Evans, 3032. What are the chances of Mette Frederiksen, the current Prime Minister and leader of the Social Democrats, becoming NATO chief after Rutte, that being Mark Rutte, the Dutch NATO General Secretary. And that's parentheses, presuming the Republicans aren't in the White House. I don't think they're great. So Mette Frederiksen was a leading contender to be made head of NATO last time around when they chose their leader. However, reporting suggests that she massively blew it when she went to Washington to meet with congressional leaders, especially with Republicans, when she started talking about LGBT issues, which they didn't very much appreciate. They didn't think that that was necessary or appropriate for a NATO head, and that made the White House, which then was led by Joe Biden, albeit, think maybe she's not the best bet in case we get a Republican president next. I think she's blown it permanently. I don't think she's up for contention for that. I think she could be up for contention for EU top posts. I think they're going to be renegotiated in 2029, correct me if I'm wrong. Ursula von der Leyen, the current, the EU Commission president, I don't think she is up for another term. Mette Frederiksen could maybe replace her. Antonio Costa, the president of the council, he's eligible for another term, but he might not want to, or there might not be efficient support. That could also be a job that Mette Frederiksen could be up for. So I think it's more likely that she leaves to go join a NATO, or go take on a high position in NATO. Sorry, a high position in the EU rather than NATO. Right. Boom. BH Mend 1669. Is it possible to get Venstre, Liberal Alliance, or the Danish People's Party instead of the moderates? I assume that this is for a red bloc government. The short answer is no. The long answer is Venstre have already pretty much ruled out working with the Social Democrats anymore. Liberal Alliance, absolutely not. They've entirely ruled it out during the whole campaign, and the same with the Danish People's Party. So that's the long answer. No, it isn't. It could be interesting, but they'd have to really, really backtrack on a lot of very, very hardline promises. I'm going to take a couple of more questions, and then I think it might be time to slowly wrap up on here. We won't know much more tonight. But we will know more in the coming weeks and months, and I will be making videos on all of that. If you guys aren't subscribed to the channel, make sure to do that. There will be more updates coming in the near future. Husin5033, can you make a video about Denmark's small parties like the Christian Democrats or others? And thank you. I'd love to make that video. I probably will at some point. Denmark does have some smaller parties. The country is quite strict about which parties qualify to get on the ballot for parliamentary elections, which is why we've just had these 12 parties we're talking about. These are the parties that through one means or the other have qualified. There are then also other parties that have tried to qualify that haven't. And yeah, they could definitely be interesting to talk about. So absolutely. Cheesy Peasy Snake, I love this question. What particularly will you remember from the election? I will remember, I think, two things. Firstly, I'll remember the big issues because they were so unexpected to probably everyone. The two big issues that dominated this election were, one, the quality of drinking water, and two, the animal welfare in pork farms. Two quite niche subjects, but also, I mean, very important considering, almost everyone, but a lot of people in Denmark drink tap water, so the quality of that is obviously very important, and the pork industry is massive in Denmark. That's the first thing I'll remember. The second thing is a TV program, which aired on the channel TV2, which was called Højskolen, which was filmed 6 days before the election was called. They didn't know that it was going to be called 6 days later, but they had an inkling, where all the party leaders got together in a højskole, which is this interesting Danish phenomenon. It's For the Brits, it's mildly similar to a college rather than a university, but it's something, if you're not Danish, you don't know what a high school is, go read about it. It's a fascinating cultural thing. But all the party leaders were gathered there for 24 hours together. They ate together, drank together, socialized, and they filmed the whole thing. So it was sort of part reality show, part political debates, because they brought party leaders together, had chats. But it was a really, really fascinating program, and it was sort of politics in a new way. There were a lot of fears that it would be very sort of Big Brother-esque. It wasn't. It was a lot more tasteful, I think, in the way that it was done, which was really, really fascinating program. If you're Danish, and have a subscription to TV2 Plus, I'd go check out some of the episodes. If you're not Danish, but you can speak Danish, maybe with an IP address you could get access. If you don't speak Danish, it might be hard to get a hold of it, but it's a fascinating concept. I hope other countries do it too, because I really enjoyed watching it. Cool. We've got a message here. Chris Dobbs. Would you like Denmark to adopt a system like Norway's with a 4% electoral threshold for leveling seats? Me personally, no. Are there people who would like this? I am 100% sure there will be. 12 parties, which we've just elected, is a lot. 2% threshold is quite low compared to a lot of other countries. So, it wouldn't massively change the sort of the fringes of Danish politics. But I personally quite like the idea of smaller parties being able to represent smaller segments of the general population. I think it's a good way to make everyone feel seen, even if they have niche views. And the cool thing about the Danish parliament is that the vast majority of legislation is passed with a very broad range of parties, which means that all the votes and the parties that that are given seats have some degree of influence, even if it's a couple of small things in a piece of legislation here and there. So personally, no, but it is a debate a lot of people are having. Excellent question here from Visual708. What do you think the blue and red blocs need to do in the next 3 to 4 years to get a majority independent of the moderates? They need to be themselves. I think people haven't been able to recognize Red Bloc, especially the Social Democrats in the Red Bloc, and people haven't been able to recognize the Venstre that they know in the Blue Bloc. If they sort of try to reinvent themselves and make a really good argument for why a Red Bloc or a Blue Bloc would be best for Denmark, then they'd have success. I think if the government turns out to be what I expect it to be, which will be a center-left government, or center-left to left-wing government with the moderates, I think Blue Bloc has a brilliant opportunity to, over the next 3 to 4 years, really be able to make an argument, a unified, cohesive argument. We are Blue Bloc. This is what we believe in. These are the things that we agree on. We agree on a lot more than we disagree on. Here's why you should vote for us. I think that would be very, very positive for Blue Bloc electorally. I think alternatively, if the Red Bloc, have a very, very good run of government, even if the moderates are there, they make some massive reforms, they could maybe also have a chance. It's always harder to govern than it is to be in opposition. That's a rule of politics in general. But yeah, be themselves, make people recognize them, and then make the argument for why people should vote for them. Cool. I'm going to take a couple more questions. Loving the questions. Vespa Cromwell, do you think the rise of more hard right parties is going to continue? Parties don't come from nowhere. I think if there's a gap in the market, they will come about. I think the national conservative wing of Danish politics is quite well represented at this point. You've got a sort of somewhat broad church in the form of the Danish People's Party. They appeal to blue-collar workers. They appeal to pensioners. They appeal to the working class. But they also appeal to certain sort of cultural elites, which is quite broad tent. The Denmark Democrats appeal to rural voters on the National Conservative end of the spectrum, and also to farmers. And then you've got the Citizens Party, who appeal to sort of people who don't feel like they belong in the Danish political system, or at least not that they are represented. The sort of very online segments, the young people who feel a bit disenfranchised. So I think, you've got three different flavors of National Conservative there. I don't see another party bubbling up. You've got a lot of talk about the New Right, a party that used to be fairly prominent in Danish politics. It was elected to parliament in 2 cycles, but then essentially dissolved. They're out there trying to keep the party alive. I don't see that happening. I just don't see a gap in the market. I think the 3 National Conservative parties right now have, pretty much got it in the bag. Let's see. Getting more updates here from Ketchup Blood. First one of the larger towns update. I take Greenlandic lessons every week. So let me see if I can pronounce this halfway accurately. I'd go Krakatarsuak is my guess at how to pronounce the name of that town. I think it's halfway decent. I've only taken, 8 weeks of Greenlandic lessons, but it's very hard to learn. Ketchup Blood says Nalarak in first, Atasut in second. If this holds, that is a wild result in Greenland. Nalarak, maybe the least surprising of the two. This is a very pro-independence party. It got the second most votes and the second most seats at the Greenlandic election last year. It's Atasut that really surprises me, because this is a very small party. It's very pro the union with Denmark. It's center-right liberal conservative, sister party to Venstre. And if they end up taking that second seat, that would be quite something in the Greenlandic parliamentary narrative currently going on. Right, let's see. Hussein 5033, good night. And last question, where to watch Højskolen? TV2 Play, if you've got access to that. Let's see. Kralix NET. What we don't have, but there could potentially be a market for in Danish politics, is a right-wing immigration-friendly party to moderate the rest of the right-wing parties. Yeah, that's an interesting idea. I mean, the moderates are fairly economically liberal, so fairly right-wing on economic issues. I think they kind of fit that profile a little bit, and they're very pro-immigration. They're very immigration-friendly. So I think they might struggle if there were a new party to differentiate itself from the moderates. Unless you want to go even further in terms of liberal economic policy to something more libertarian-coded, and then be immigration-friendly. Like what Liberal Alliance used to be. It's moved rightwards on immigration in the past couple of years. Interesting, potentially. I mean, if you're Danish, go start the party. I might not vote for you. I might, who knows? But that could be really interesting. Let us see. I'm going to take a few more. I said I'd stop at 1, but I am enjoying this, and I appreciate all the wonderful questions, you guys. Yeah, other people saying, I've got Kellebach 5792. I feel like the right-wing pro-immigration party should have been LA. It used to be LA, Liberal Alliance. Tilo Franzen 667. Do you think the low 2% threshold, the low 2% hurdle makes negotiations harder and creates unnecessary stress? It does to an extent, absolutely. It means more smaller parties, a more fractured parliament, more parties you need to, incorporate somehow and give something. Let's see, I'm going to scroll a little bit more. Uh, boo, 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 boo. Agufug, Agufug. Does Peluden have a future? Peluden. This is in reference to a person called Rasmus Peluden. He was party leader for a party called Strandkoers. I believe translated in English it was Hardline. Who stood for parliament in 2019. And his sort of big road to fame was he would go to areas with a high immigrant and high Muslim population percentage, and he would burn the Quran. This garnered him a lot of attention, a lot of threats, and it essentially sort of created a cycle where he said, we need to fear Islam because, it's a violent religion or it's intolerant. Then he would burn the Quran. There would be people who yelled him down, a couple attempts to kill or attack him, and that would sort of lead to a cycle of, a cycle around that point. He got, I think it was 1.8% of the vote. He was this close to getting into parliament with a couple other MPs. And in both this election and the one before, he stood as an independent candidate in Copenhagen. I believe it's Copenhagen. And he's never gotten close to getting in. His potential political future would be if he somehow manages to make the party eligible to stand in an election again, and to somehow sort of create a narrative around him again. But I do think he had his moment in 2019. I think it's over. I think most of the country has moved on from Rasmus Paludan. Let's see. More people asking questions about the threshold. Let me see. I'm going to try to find like 1, 2, or 3 good questions, and then I'm going to call it a night. Because I think we know the result, and the next couple of days... Well, tomorrow is going to be interesting because all the party leaders are going to meet with the king, and they're going to tell him what kind of government they'd like to see. The king will then appoint what's called a kongelig undersøger, a formateur, probably a formateur. I'm not French. Who will then try to form a government, to form a majority. That might be mid-of election. Party leaders might try to play games. It might turn out it's someone else. And then the next couple of weeks or months will include a bunch of negotiations, and then we'll get a government at the end. I've already sort of said what I think is the likeliest. But yeah, so that's what the next couple of days and weeks are going to look like, and I will be making videos about all of that. Okay, Ketchup Blood keeps updating on the Greenlandic results. The larger town votes are starting to roll in and shifted Atasut to 4th place. That makes a lot more sense. First is Nalarak. That would surprise me, but maybe that's the feeling in Greenland that I'm unaware of. Second is IA, this party called Inuit Ataqatigiit, which is a left-wing sister party to the Green Left. Third is Siumut, the sister party to the Social Democrats. I'm surprised that the current government ruling party, Demokratit, which is a liberal right-wing party or liberal center-right party, why that party isn't doing better. Aha, cheesy peasy snake. I'm losing my voice. So only a couple questions left. Excellent question. I heard an election night debate is usually held around now. How big is it that it got cancelled? Yes. So what used to happen is once all the results were in, once it was clear sort of where the parties would stand, all the party leaders would gather together somewhere, in the around this time, in some studio, and they would have kind of a debate, kind of a reflection talk about the campaign and what was ahead. And it's been Danish tradition for many decades now. But all the parties, except for the moderates and the Citizens Party, said, hey, we don't want to do this anymore. We're meeting again for a similar type of program tomorrow. I think it's at noon or early afternoon. So we don't really see the point of doing this late at night. How big is it that it got cancelled? It's fairly big. It's been one of the big news stories of today. And yeah, personally, I loved it. I loved staying up to watch it. I think there's something so nice about all of these people really debating, going at it with one another for a couple of weeks, and then coming together at the end, realizing now we have to form a government, we have to start working together in a parliament. Ketchup blood. Nuke is still counting. That's where Democratic could do well. Hussein 5033. What about a left-wing conservative party a la Wagenknecht? So, for people who aren't familiar, Wagenknecht, what was her first name? Is it Sarah Wagenknecht? Something like that. A German politician, I think she's more or less left politics now, created an economically left-wing, socially right-wing party in Germany, which got very, very close to getting seats at the last German election. I think that could be interesting. To an extent, it's kind of the Danish People's Party, though. Economically, the Danish People's Party is not... Sarah Wagenknecht, thank you, chat. Economically, the Danish People's Party is not as left-wing as Sarah Wagenknecht and her alliance was. Or I guess the party still exists, so still is. But the idea of being sort of economically somewhat left and then socially more conservative, semi-reflected with the Danish People's Party. Is there maybe a hole in the market for this? Maybe. If that's something you believe in, go found it. I think that could be interesting. All right. Let's see. Is there one last question to end the night on? And Ketchup Blood. Thank you again for sharing some good sources there. KNR, the national broadcaster for Greenland. Always a good source for Greenlandic politics. And for Danish speakers, they always have good articles in Danish as well as in Greenlandic. The Balls one, will you do something similar for the Swedish election? Will we get another live stream? I might do something similar for the Swedish election. I'm not nearly as close to being, I'm not nearly as well informed about Swedish politics as I am Danish. I follow generally, but, so I might struggle with that, but then maybe we could make it a collaborative effort where it's less me talking about it. Maybe we could do some back and forths. I'll have a think of something interesting, or maybe I'll see if I can find a Swede to bring on. Final question. This is a perfect one to end on. How much, this is from Prink9273. Again, I'm going to assume that this is a serious question despite your username. How much of an impact did Trump have on this election? Very little. Very, very little. In most ways. There are a couple of ways. So, Trump played a big role in terms of when this election was called. When you had this whole Greenland crisis and Trump threatening to take Greenland, threatening to buy, maybe even invade, you saw the Social Democrats and the moderates have a bit of a boost in opinion polls. The Social Democrats, of course, because Mette Frederiksen, as the prime minister, sort of led the country through this crisis, and the moderates, because their party leader, Lars Løkke Rasmussen, is foreign minister. They also saw a boost because people thought that he did very, very well as foreign minister in that situation. So it was a big role. It played a big role in when the election was called. During the election, it filled very, very little because most parties agree on Greenland. Well, all parties, actually. There's no party that thought, hey, Trump's got a point. There's no party that thought Denmark shouldn't stand up for Greenland and that Denmark shouldn't say, Greenland's not for sale. So during the campaign, it didn't really fill very much airtime. But I think it's also part of the reason why there's a slightly more amicable and serious tone to this election than there maybe was in the 2022, and definitely than there was in the 2019 election, just to name a few of the recent ones. And I think a big part of the reason to that is people realize that we've got a threat from the East, we've got Russia, but we've also now potentially got a threat from the West in the US. So it's added a sense of gravity to this election as well, even if it's not being directly addressed. Okay, Prank9273. Okay, one last question. What were the biggest issues and arguments of this election? I will quickly answer this. I've spoken about it already a little bit, but the two big issues, drinking water and pollution of drinking water. Sorry, I just got distracted by other comments. The pollution of drinking water from pesticides was a very big debate. The welfare of pigs in farms, the pork industry more generally, was the other very big issue. And then smaller things like the Danish People's Party's suggestion of remigration was debated. Generally, the cost of living, the cost of oil and gas prices. You've also had debates around a wealth tax, and you have had some talk about how big should class sizes be in primary school. Those were the big topics, and I think in broad strokes we've covered cheesy peasy snake ads and immigration. Yeah, the Danish People's Party's remigration, and then, you know, other debates on immigration as well. But not quite as much as it usually does. And with that, thank you so much, everyone, for joining my live stream. I really, really appreciated it. You guys keeping me company on election night. I've really, really enjoyed doing this. I hope to do more stuff like this. I'm still learning the tech of it. I had a couple of technical difficulties at the start, but I think I'm sort of getting a grasp on it. I'll practice more. But I'm thinking about doing this more frequently. You know, not just random nights, but if there's something interesting happening, this could be an interesting way to do it. And I might want to, you know, level it up a bit, see if I, you know, want to bring other people on here, make some more graphics and stuff. But yeah, really enjoyed this. Thank you so much, everyone, for keeping me company, for asking some really, really excellent questions. Really interesting questions, some I hadn't thought about myself. But yeah, thank you so much, everyone. Really enjoyed it. And if you're not subscribed, do subscribe. There will be so many videos on the government negotiations, I am sure. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you for watching. Good night.